We never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
What's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady. We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Do you not understand that they are that way because you're Joe Flacco?
You just like to discredit things that people deserve credit for.
That you can't possibly be expected to defend that.
Talk about the game, Sam. So who cares about what people think about us?
Yeah, I like football season, all the things that go with it.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo here with Sam Monson, and we are live on YouTube. We had some technical difficulties for the last, 3 months or so, but we're back and we're live on YouTube. We used to do this all the time. So hello, YouTube watchers, viewers. I did a little poll the other day to see what people, how they like to consume the podcast.
Oh yeah? What did you learn?
It was about 35% YouTube. Now, I maybe already knew that, but there's a lot of people who like to listen to the audio and watch us.
So you learned nothing?
Either or. That was good. Just a good way to push the podcast. It was great. We got all sorts of new listeners. They promised they would listen.
You think that because people clicked "I will listen"
Yep.
on a poll, it means they're automatically new listenership now?
Binding contract. They will.
Okay.
Anyway, we're excited. We're previewing the AFC and NFC North. Used to be the Central, Sam, back in the day.
Did.
AFC and NFC North. We already previewed the East and the West. Both divisions. Those are the last two podcasts we had. If you haven't listened, go check them out because we're giving every team some love. They get about between 12 and 25 minutes every single team, and we're going to preview the season. You ready to go?
Yeah, let's go.
No big news to hit on, really.
Nothing happened. Quiet couple of days, which is making the daily a bit of a struggle at the moment. The PFF NFL Daily, which you should also subscribe to.
Yeah, go check out the daily. It is not on YouTube. Now, again, some people on YouTube were asking about that. If you really, really want to listen to the daily on YouTube, we could try to push it through, make it happen. I usually don't like recording the video for that thing. It's nice and relaxed, but we can make it happen if we need to.
We could.
But yeah, it's audio only. And make sure you download and subscribe. And also, make sure you subscribe over at PFF.com. That's where you get all your fantasy tools, gambling tools, betting, really. It's not gambling. It's betting. Just making an educated, wager. That's what we do. But we've got all the tools for all that stuff over at PFF.com. I suggest PFF Elite. The top package, everything you need, 365 days of access. All right, we're going team by team, starting in the AFC North. Timer has started. Oh, pause the timer. 1 second. I had an idea. Can we follow through with it? For next Thursday's show, can we get questions from, I want questions from all 32 fan bases. Did you sign off on this idea? You don't love it.
I believe I cautioned this idea, but you apparently
I think we push it through. So my idea is I want to do one question per team. I want our listeners to provide the questions. So you can either email us at nflpodcast@pff.com, email us the question, or tweet us a question at PFF_Steve, at PFF_Sam. Tweet us. What do we need a good hashtag for this?
Okay.
Hashtag,
I want no part of this.
Hashtag
I'm
PFF questions.
Washing my hands of this
Hashtag
entire
PFF
enterprise.
questions so we can easily sort this thing. We'll answer one burning question per team on next Thursday's show. We'll have more about this. I think, but we're going to do it time limit style. So we'll ask the question. You get a minute. I get a minute. Done. And we need like a ding ding or something to shut you down. Sound good?
Okay.
That's a great idea.
I'm just gonna show up for the show and sit in the chair.
No.
I need take care of all this.
I need your interaction.
I want no part of this.
Start the timer. We're going Cincinnati Bengals, our hometown team. Let's preview the Bengals. What are they going to be this season? We've been on the previous podcast talking best case scenario, worst case scenario. So everybody spent all their time leading up to the draft talking about Penei Sewell, Jamar Chase. Do you go offensive line? Do you go receiver? The Bengals went receiver, which means the biggest question mark remains along that offensive line.
Yeah, and people are already claiming victory one way or the other based off training camp
absolutely.
highlights and all those kinds of things. Burrow and the offense have been struggling at times. They've been getting run over by the offense, or the offensive line has been getting run over. Therefore, the Bengals made the wrong choice, and they should have drafted Penei Sewell, who, of course, would have solved all 5 offensive line spots, not just one. Look, the Bengals' offensive line is probably still going to be a weakness. Like, they did address it. It's not like they did nothing. They bring in Jackson Carman. They've hoped to get an improved Jonah Williams. They should be better than last year, but they were one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL last year, and it was an accident waiting to happen. Now, have they done enough to prevent that being the case again this year? Probably not.
Let's break down their line. And again, I mentioned this before. PFF.com, we've got a depth chart section. It shows the starters. It shows 11 personnel, 12 personnel, but it's a great way to follow along because breaking down the depth chart and the starting offensive line for the Bengals. Jonah Williams returns at left tackle. He is their best player. Signing Riley Reif, the epitome of the league average tackle, which is good. Which is a good, it's a good player to have when you've had a below average right tackle over the last few years. So let's say improvement there. The biggest question is on the interior. And as maybe it was our friend Nate Tice or somebody mentioned, don't forget, it was the guard who blew the block or whatever that did get Joe Burrow hurt. So as much as everybody's like, hey, get Penei Sewell, and I mean, it was the guard. It was the interior, which is still a question mark for
and
the
Bengals.
Reports
in camp, it's not, one guy has been getting his ass kicked and therefore Joe Burrow is running for his life. The entire offensive line's getting owned. Like, this is not, one guy wouldn't fix this, right? Particularly one guy on the edge, while, as you say, the biggest problem remains on the interior. So we've been through this ad nauseum, and it's painful, and it remains painful. The Penei Sewell, Jamar Chase thing was a coin flip, and one pick didn't change the situation they were presented with that offensive line. Sure, Penei Sewell would probably have upgraded somewhere on that line, but at least 3/5 of that line right now are still a weakness. He wouldn't have solved that.
Yeah, I mean, you keep citing, Penei Sewell's only one player, which is true. But if you're going to revamp your offensive line, you do have to start somewhere. And having good players does help. So I don't necessarily buy your argument that Penei Sewell's not going to solve it overnight, therefore don't pick him. But where
that's
they
not my
are,
argument. That's my argument that it's not. My argument is that because he doesn't solve it, it's not the reason to pick him. Like, it is a coin flip between 2 very good players, each of whom address a weakness, each of whom advance some area of the field, and the reasons for picking one over the other are way more complicated than the idiot drawing cartoon graphic of, you throw to a receiver with no Penei Sewell and Joe Burrow's getting killed.
See, I love being live on YouTube because I do check out the comments every now and again, and I can answer Oliver Carter here, which is, why not protect your future? I don't get it. And again, our answer will often be, you can also protect the quarterback by having him get rid of the ball quickly. The only way you can get rid of the ball quickly is to have receivers who get open. And that is where the Bengals' strength will lie, with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd. When you have 3 legitimate receivers, chances are one of them is going to be open, right? So that's the key. Or at least a T. Higgins might be covered, but you're like, hey, this dude's a basketball player, throw it up to him. So you can protect your quarterback by giving him weapons to throw to. And they both work together to get rid of the ball and to not let your quarterback get hit.
And again, they're not mutually exclusive. Just because you selected Jamar Chase at the top of the draft doesn't mean you are therefore forevermore ignoring the offensive line. They came back and drafted an offensive lineman. Like, they didn't ignore it. The next pick was spent on an offensive lineman. It's not like they decided that because we're picking Chase, we therefore have determined the offensive line is irrelevant and she'll never be fixed. Like, they came back with the next pick. It was a decision about the balance. Which guy do you take up top? Which is the more important player? I thought, by the way, you were going to answer the guy asking, we're going to interview Bobby Wagner.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to answer him too. Are we interviewing Bobby Wagner? I'm going to say maybe.
He's probably not coming live.
Maybe.
I would guess.
We have nothing set up for today, but the days that we did have something set up, he didn't show up.
That's true.
So if he calls us at the end of the show, we will interview Bobby Wagner live.
Well, I mean, if he phones in, we'll definitely pick up.
We will absolutely answer. So if somebody could get Bobby to phone in, we'll answer the phone. Going back to the Bengals, so let's just look at the interior of the offensive line quickly. Quinton Spain, who had a 56 grade last year, but is at least a couple years removed from playing good football, so that's a positive. But Trey Hopkins at center was a bottom 10 center last year, even though he improved a lot. And Michael Jordan and Jackson Carman battling for the right guard spot. I mean, Carman was the second-round pick, who I think is one of the most important picks in the draft. Because if he is good, it does at least move the line in the right direction.
If Carman doesn't start, that's a pretty bad indictment of that pick. Not because you shouldn't have picked him, but because you just potentially picked the wrong guy, right? If you had ignored Penei Sewell, drafted Jamar Chase, and then picked a stud in the second round who comes in, massively upgrades one guard spot, like you could argue that had as big an impact on where exactly your weakness is on that line versus Penei Sewell. Like you can argue that made a bigger difference. Now, if he can't even start or he comes in and he's bad, that's a really bad. I mean, that just makes the pick look terrible.
Yeah, Carmen's the guy that you really need to keep an eye on. So the Bengals, I'm trying to quit Twitter a little bit, but I did see somebody make the joke, hey, the Bengals are the only team that's had a bad practice here so far, but the only offense that's practiced poorly in the preseason. How much do you make of the negativity coming out of practice, Joe Burrow looking uncomfortable? And let me just preface this by saying, most quarterbacks who are coming off a knee injury do take time to get back. I mean, Brady did it in 2009. We've seen Carson Palmer take time after his knee injury here in Cincinnati. Usually guys take time after their knee injuries. So how much do we buy into the lack of hype coming out of Bengals preseason?
I mean, when you listen to people, defenses are supposed to start ahead of offenses in terms of practice, right? When you first get everyone in pads on the field practicing, defense is supposed to be ahead because it takes a little bit longer to install all the stuff that you need for offenses to function cohesively. So it's not massively surprising that they've been ahead. If it doesn't get better, though, and it's not even necessarily that they've struggled, it's the way that they're struggling, right? Like the offensive line just getting repeatedly beat up, which was obviously the problem last year. And like if that doesn't start to get fixed, I think it essentially is a foreshadowing of what this season is going to be for the Bengals, which is honestly very much like last season, which is the offensive line is simply not good enough for that offense to function the way it's supposed to.
Let's describe what Joe Burrow's season was last year. And this might sound, he had a 75.1 overall grade, which for a rookie is very, very good. Middle of the pack grade, good, solid, and the distribution of the grade that we've cited here many times is intriguing. Up to 20 yards, Burrow had one of the highest PFF passing grades in the entire league. Beyond 20 yards, the worst. Terrible, horrible. This is exactly what Josh Allen was last year at this time.
Right.
Now, they're completely different players, completely different arm talent and the whole thing. But as we've said before, up to 20 yards is the more stable number. It is the number that is more indicative of future performance. The downfield stuff, especially the stats down the field, are very much dependent on the receiver, the scheme, and all that stuff.
Which is part of the reason why Jamar Chase
It's why Jamar Chase is here. So, I mean, I would bet strongly that Joe Burrow, I'm going to pull up his deep passing numbers as you respond here. I would bet strongly that his deep passing numbers are going to be not even just a little better, astronomically better with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, right? And if he stays consistent up to 20 yards, the Bengals should be very excited. Potential breakout season for Joe Burrow. However, if he's under pressure 5% more than you would like, that would absolutely temper expectations.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big differences between him and Josh Allen would be that Allen always had not always, but the platform with the offensive line was never the problem in terms of his deep ball.
They did a good job of
building
that line
from last year into last season. The offensive line was never a question mark about whether he could discover that deep ball. It was, does he have the receivers to get it done? Can he just put the ball in the same zip code as those guys? Whatever it is. Whereas with Joe Burrow, you're looking at it and saying, okay, he made an upgrade at receiver. He got in Jamar Chase. That could have a Stephon Diggs-esque effect on that deep ball. He has the deep ball. We've seen it in college. Like he had an amazingly accurate deep pass. So it's within his capabilities. But is the offensive line there to enable him to get it done? Like, does he have the pocket to step into on a consistent basis to be able to make those deep throws?
Burrow was 9 for 48 on 20-plus yard throws. 61 grade was fourth worst in the entire NFL. 9 for 48, 18% completion percentage. That is horrendous. That was third worst in the NFL. Only Dwayne Haskins and Mitch Trubisky were worse. So I expect those to get better, not just because we're like, things regress positively and all that stuff, but he showed it in college. And he showed it in college with Jamar Chase. So I expect Burrow to get better down the field. The one thing we've spent 90% of the time, and I see the timer, 80% of the time so far talking about the offense. The Bengals defense has been neglected as far as discussion goes, I think, for much of this season. And I think it's going to be a big part of their story. They invested heavily on the defensive line this offseason, invested in Trey Hendrickson as a free agent, re-signed Sam Hubbard to a big deal. Larry Ogunjobi's there, DJ Reader. So over the last 2 years, they've completely overhauled this line. Will that be enough? Because even in the secondary, they're bringing Chidobe Awuzie at corner. They bring in Mike Hilton, who I love, to play the slot. But those guys can be hit or miss too, dependent. Hilton might be a little scheme dependent. We'll see how he does outside of Pittsburgh. Still a lot of questions here on this defense. Yeah,
and the overhauling of the defensive line, it reminds me a little bit like Kansas City's offseason in terms of their offensive line. Like it was just to stay where you were. You know, you had great players in Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap, and you develop a guy like Sam Hubbard. You had Carl Lawson, who was your best pass rusher for years, who departs to the Jets. And so you let Lawson walk, you replace him with Hendrickson, who's coming off a career year, but even his career year, the sacks were better, but overall was the pass rushing performance better than Carl Lawson? Probably not. DJ Reader has come in, was injured, and hasn't yet shown what he can do. Ogunjobi flashed earlier in his career and has been disappointing since. So you've kind of brought in all these players, but the line doesn't look much better than it has been. It's just you prevented it completely collapsing and being like a group of nobody after if you hadn't made some moves. So it's an intriguing group, and they have invested a lot, but it's certainly not going to carry a defense if the back seven can't deal with it.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what this looks like. I really think we're talking all AFC North right now. We'll talk the NFC North as well, but the AFC North, I think, might be right below the NFC West as the best division in football. I think the Bengals should be better. Browns and Ravens on paper look like they're battling for the top, and say what you want about. We'll talk about the Steelers plenty, but Mike Tomlin, Ben Roethlisberger still there, good defense still there. They'll be competitive. So if the Bengals even get better this year, and I'll say this for all four teams here, even if they're better this year, will it show up in their record? I think that's a fair question mark here with Cincinnati trying to gauge their improvement. If the defense is average, I think they've got a shot. I mean, it's really, if the defense gets to average, the O-line gets closer to average, those are the biggest stories to allow all of those potential playmakers to shine.
This is also a really rough division to have a bad offensive line in.
Yeah,
you've got Pittsburgh,
really
you've got Baltimore, Cleveland now have Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney and some like impact players on their defensive line. Like this is not a division to be rolling in there with a subpar offensive line.
Maybe that is part of the argument, right? I mean, I know we talk to teams a lot, and they do think a lot about their division. They think a lot about the games that they know they have to play. I have to play these games twice per year. And if there are trends within the division, you maybe make a few team building decisions there. So if you're talking a coin flip with Penei Sewell and Jamar Chase, how much should you be leaning Penei Sewell because of the way the Steelers blitz, the way the Ravens blitz, the way the one-on-one pass rushers that the Steelers have? You mentioned the Browns with Myles Garrett and everything. I do wonder if that is the argument back in April that maybe could have swayed the Bengals the other way. Like, hey, we got to face all these really good pass rushes twice a year.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't – the Penei Sewell, Jamar Chase argument has always been neither side is wrong. Like the only people that are wrong in the whole argument are the ones that are 100% certain that they're right. The conclusion is right either way, because I don't think, honestly, anybody is smart enough to weigh up every single variable involved and decide the 49.3% edge here means you should go the other way. The only people that are wrong are the ones that are like, this is why I'm 100% right. You should have taken Chase or you should have taken Sewell.
Yeah, I think the people that are wrong are just like, build in the trenches. It's the only way to go.
Yes.
It's what all good teams do. And it's like, well, they're good enough in the trenches. They don't necessarily build from there.
What's your best case scenario? What's their over-under?
I got to go find it.
Okay. Where are you going to find it, Steve?
Over at DraftKings.com.
There you go.
What's your best case scenario as I'm getting this thing?
Well, the best case scenario is somehow that offensive line is passable, just good enough that the playmakers they have on offense can actually get something done, and their offense is pretty good. If that happens, I think they're okay. Otherwise, yeah, not so much.
Where the heck did it go?
You've lost the odds. This is not helpful.
No, I can't find it right now.
Huh.
What's happened here?
Okay.
I got it. I'm working on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with you as far as the line. I think the free agents in the secondary pan out. Can you find this?
Well, give me a second.
I've got a million other tabs open because I have to read ads and all that stuff.
6.5.
Oh man, I might lean over here. 6.5 wins.
No, under.
You're going under?
Yeah.
So you don't have any faith in the line?
Certainly not within that division.
Yeah. The place that they did invest in the line was second round and also late in the draft. So they've got some developmental players. Yeah, it'll be an interesting one to watch. But best case scenario is Joe Burrow looks like a star. Looks like the number 1 overall pick. He's protected well enough. Him and Jamar Chase pick up where they left off in college. And the D-line is a top 5 D-line. And it might protect the back 7 a little bit. Linebacker's still a major issue for the Bengals. I'm going to lean over. I'm in Cincinnati. I'm going to lean positive here for our hometown Bengals.
Okay.
Before we get into the rest of the AFC North/Central, just got to give a shout out to our friends over at Fantrax, free fantasy football league manager. That's what they have there. Free fantasy football league manager. It's the most customizable, easy to use, and feature-rich platform in the entire industry. And PFF is gearing up to play our leagues on Fantrax this season. They have multi-team trades, bonus points for touchdowns of different yardage. And if you're coming from another site, that's not a problem. Fantrax can import any of your current leagues completely free. I was just upstairs watching Eric Eager. He's got like 4 Fantrax pages. He's not even working right now. It's just all Fantrax right now, sorting out his fantasy leagues. Create a free account now using promo code PFF at fantrax.com/PFF and get a chance to win a trip to any regular season game this year for you and your entire league. Plus $6,000. Wow, what a deal. Where would you want to go? It's promo code PFF at fantrax.com/PFF.
Hold on.
Go do it. Pittsburgh Steelers, they're the next one in my random order of the AFC North here.
Yeah. Thank God for timestamps. Otherwise, everyone would stop listening to this podcast based off your order.
Just don't worry about it. No, people don't want timestamps. They want to hear all of our analysis on every team anyway. They're not just looking for their team. But if they are, we have timestamps for you. Speaking of offensive lines, if we spent the entire offseason talking about the Bengals and how they're not protecting Joe Burrow and you got to protect the franchise and all that stuff, what's going to happen in Pittsburgh? Where on paper, I've got them at number 31 ahead of just the New York Giants as far as offensive lines go.
Yeah. I mean, everything we've just been saying about how bad the Bengals offensive line is and how it could be completely prohibitive to them having any kind of success, Pittsburgh's might be worse.
But
now, okay, the good thing is they don't have to face their own defense.
But based off of one Hall of Fame game where jet sweeps came out and deep, long play actions and the whole thing, will Matt Canada, new offensive coordinator, who is known for just trickeration and motion all over the place, will he be able to implement that system properly with Big Ben's, approval to protect the offensive line a little bit? That's the one way that you can do it.
Yeah.
Misdirection, movement, play action.
I mean, I think that Hall of Fame game, and they're playing tonight, right? They're one of the teams on Thursday night.
I think they're playing Philadelphia live here tonight.
So if we see the same thing again tonight, I think you have to be encouraged by what Matt Canada is doing on offense for the Steelers. Like this, all those things we talked about. Look, people have said that motion for the sake of motion it's not just a good thing on its own, right? It needs to have a purpose. It needs to be doing something for your offense. But motion teamed with bunch formations, teamed with play action, these are all ways that you can steal an edge on a defense and cause just a beat of hesitation and a beat of confusion and a split second that you need to get a guy open or to hold back a pass rush that's beating up your offensive line, all those kinds of things. And they're things that the Steelers just haven't done for years. Reportedly because largely Ben Roethlisberger just doesn't like that stuff and prefers, a nice clean picture for himself, which, makes sense as a quarterback. You want to get the cleanest and most accurate picture you can, but it also means that a defense doesn't have to worry about anything else and they can just go 100% full throttle, 100 miles an hour the whole way. If you implement all those things, it might make your life a little bit trickier as a quarterback, but if you're a Hall of Fame quarterback, frankly, it's something you should be able to overcome. And the flip side of that is it means the defense has to deal with all that and process all that and hesitate for a split second and potentially therefore open up some things for you to exploit. So far in preseason, And remember, like, it's preseason. If you're breaking this stuff out in preseason, which is supposed to be vanilla, don't show anything type of game planning, if you're breaking this stuff out now, it probably means it's going to feature heavily for you in the regular season, which I think is a very good thing for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think here's what their offense looked like last year, right? As much as I feel like their offensive line is a question mark, they were 31st in run blocking last year. And the name value that they had last year with Ali Villanueva still there, the great Ali Villanueva. Marquise Pouncey was there. David DeCastro was there, right? I mean, they had the guys where if they brought that same group back on paper, we would probably rank them around 15th. We would probably look at that unit and say, there's a good average offensive line, but they did regress last year, especially from a run blocking standpoint. So that offense became as dink and dunk as any offense in the league, where it's just Big Ben, short stuff, like crazy, and it was just very one-dimensional. So in theory, the offensive line might not be it might not even be worse than last year, but based off of history, there's just not a track record of a core of four playing well at left tackle. Zach Banner has played well in very limited time. He's projected to be the starting right tackle. Rookie Kendrick Green projected to start at center. Trey Turner had a 34 grade last year and just continues. His grades have gotten worse since he came into the league, 2014. So, and Kevin Dotson is battling he was their best, looked like maybe their best returner in his second year here. And Mike Tomlin's not loving his performance in training camp so far. So even if they protect them, you still have to convert 3rd and 8s every now and again. And that's where these guys could be exposed. And you go back to the division again. You got to beat the Ravens. You got to beat the Browns. The Bengals just revamped their defensive line, like we said. So the line will still be an issue, potentially, but you have to be able to – they might be doing some good things to protect them.
Yeah, it looks like they are. And they do have the receiving core to make it work. Like that's a talented group of receivers. Roethlisberger is at least making all the right noises in terms of, hey, I thought I was healthy last year, but little did I know, how much the elbow surgery was still lingering, and now I'm 100% healthy. Like, who knows? That might all be crap. But maybe there is a chance that Roethlisberger is significantly healthier and therefore better this year, another year removed from that significant, throwing arm injury, surgery. If those things all come together, you can do a lot to protect a bad offensive line. And maybe they will. It will still be the thing that puts a cap on how good this offense can be.
I am holding to the point that Chase Claypool is the most important non-Big Ben player on this team. I think if he is a star, which he showed signs of last year. He had some games, 3 touchdown games and games where he just won down the field and created after the catch. But if Claypool is a star, that will offset maybe a step back from an offensive line standpoint. And it's not just because of him. It's because we do like that top trio, right? We love Deontay Johnson. He gets open as well as anybody. But 14 drops last year, that's one of those things that should get better with Deontay. But Claypool has a chance to be a legitimate number one that defenses have to account for. That will open up Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Pat Freiermuth, and Eric Ebron at tight end. They just drafted Freiermuth in the 2nd round. I think he's a good, solid receiving tight end. So again, you'll hear us, all of our analysis is going to be like, who are the 3, 4, 5 playmakers that are going to elevate the quarterback? I think the Steelers have them, but if Claypool becomes the true number one, I think that is a potential game changer. And as much as we may have soured on the Steelers offseason, I feel like Claypool can cancel that out if he improves, if he's that much better this year.
Maybe. What about Najee Harris? What kind of impact can he have if the offensive line is as bad as it looks like it might be?
Now, look, we're in this tough spot.
Because running backs matter now.
We're in this tough spot at PFF here, where the nerds upstairs are coming up with some data that running backs might matter a little bit. Only a few of them.
Which, by the way,
it's only a few of them.
If you're listening to the NFL Daily, that makes me right. Remember when we discussed, does Derrick Henry matter? Running backs don't matter, but does Derrick Henry? My answer was yes.
Or maybe Dalvin Cook does. Or maybe Jamal Charles did.
My answer was yes.
You were right. Derrick Henry does matter. He's been incredible. So there are a certain number of running backs who do more consistently pick up yards above and beyond what is expected. Nick Chubb, one of them as well. If Najee is one of those guys, that'd be great. I don't know if he is. We'll see. But again, I think from a team building standpoint, it is very difficult to justify investment in the 1st round running back when you do have holes elsewhere. And we'll get to the defense because I'm I'm more worried about the defensive secondary being fragile. There is protected. Let's get to the defense right now. This defense was outstanding in 2019, outstanding last year. Can they keep that going? I know the Steelers' history is thinking about the Steel Curtain and Blitzburg and defenses and all that stuff. They were not good defensively for a while. And the last 2 years, they've turned it around and been very, very good. Can they keep that going as fragile as defense is with Joe Hayden getting older at corner, Cameron Sutton, who's a good, solid player, play outside, play in the slot. But when you're evaluating cornerback depth charts, you're looking at the top 3 or 4. You're not just looking at 2. So who's that third corner? Antoine Brooks Jr. currently maybe the guy. They've really liked James Pierre, had a pretty good little Hall of Fame game for whatever it's worth, big outside corner. Justin Lane is disappointed as a third-round pick. Who is that third guy? Because they don't have Mike Hilton now, and they don't have Steven Nelson. That's my biggest question mark on the defensive side.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a concern. The good news for Pittsburgh is that they get so much pressure that they can paper over a lot of cracks in the secondary. You can't hide terrible defensive backs, certainly not for long, but you can certainly make their life easier and make it more difficult to exploit the fact that those guys can't cover for that long if you're just constantly burying the opposing offense under pressure. And they brought back like all of those elite pass rushers. So Stephon Tuitt, Cameron Hayward, TJ Watt. They added Melvin Ingram, which honestly could be an upgrade over Bud Dupree. Tyson Alualu is back. Alex Highsmith is there and showed reasonably well in limited snaps last year when he had to step in for Bud Dupree. So that front could get a ton of pressure again. Like they led the league in pressure rate by a big distance. They were one of the highest pressure rates we've ever seen from a defense. They probably won't get to that level again just because it's a really high watermark to achieve. But if they're anywhere near that, it's the kind of level where your secondary doesn't need to be great.
Agreed. Yeah, I think Minkah Fitzpatrick's done a nice job at free safety. You mentioned all the TJ Watt stuff. TJ, not to pick on Bud Dupree for the 9,000th time, but we've always said, his production has been inflated a little bit because of the scheme. Plus, TJ Watt having Melvin Ingram plus Alex Highsmith, who's got that killer spin move. Alex Highsmith has always had that nice spin move. He showed it off in the Hall of Fame game for a sack. I think they're going to be fine, even whether they're trying to win one-on-ones with those 3 edge rushers or adding them to the blitz package and everything that Pittsburgh
and one of the
wants to do.
reasons they blitz so much is so you can't double team any of those guys. You just don't have the bodies. Without keeping 8 in to max protect, you can't pick them up. You can't double team them. You can't assign more than one guy to each one of these players. Somebody's going to have one-on-one opportunities, and that's part of the reason why not just Bud Dupree, but all of them. All of their numbers are reliant on the fact that they're not the only guy there, right? Every one of those players up front has somebody else occupying blockers that they can't dedicate to double teaming Cameron Hayward or TJ Watt or Stephon Tuitt or Melvin Ingram now. The whole thing works as a unit, particularly when you fold in the amount of blitzes they send, like the amount of extra bodies they're committing to the rush.
All right, let's talk best case scenario for the Steelers.
Okay.
I have a take.
Go on.
Much like last year's Packers, where their entire offseason felt negative. Last season, they drafted a quarterback who's not even going to replace Aaron Rodgers in 3 years. They drafted a running back in the second round, and they didn't improve. It turns out they did improve. I know they lost in the NFC Championship again, but Rodgers just got better. A star quarterback got better. Mm-hmm. Their best case scenario is Ben Roethlisberger plays better than he did last year. This is not out of the realm of possibility, right?
How much better, though? Because there's no way Roethlisberger...
Rodgers
put in a career year and was MVP. That's not within the realm of possibilities for Ben Roethlisberger.
I'm not suggesting that. I think you can make a case that the Steelers won 12 games last year despite Big Ben, despite him. Yeah, he had some good throws and some good games and stuff. He had a 68 passing grade last year. 68.
Yeah.
Quarterbacks with 68 passing grades, like Teddy Bridgewater was in that range. Right. I mean, it wasn't good.
This was a year of inflated quarterback play because of all the explosion of offense. So 68 last year is worse than 68 in most years.
It was inflated by yards after the catch and inflated in the records, and not inflated, but the record was triggered by the defense, right? I mean, that's a big part of it. So if Big Ben, the 68 passing grade is the lowest he's had in his entire career, dating back to 2000 to 06. 06 was the last time he was
worse
in that
than
range.
Andy Dalton.
There you go. So if Big Ben So again, it's easy to just fall into narratives. Big Ben's old, therefore he'll remain old and always be bad, right? Or realistically, you could say 68 is far below his career level. If he just gets back to 75, which he was in 2018, his last full season, when he threw for 5,000 yards, if he just gets back to there, where we were still saying he wasn't as good as the stats would show that year because he got away with a lot of stuff. If he's just back to 75, 76, 77, and you get the Claypool emerging.
It's actually a fascinating group of quarterbacks between like 70 and 66 last year.
And just to highlight, for people here, the way you interpret this stuff is the passing grade is what the quarterback did, and if the stats are better than what he should have done, it's luck, it's supporting cast, it's good favorable defensive matchups, whatever it is. If the stats are below, it's the opposite. Bad luck, bad supporting cast, tough defenses that you face.
And there's definitely also an element in which Roethlisberger contributes to those stats by being intelligent and getting in the right plays and making the right adjustments and doing stuff that Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph weren't doing the year before.
Yeah.
Which is why part of the reason there's a big jump in record, even though the quarterback wasn't playing that much better on a throw-to-throw basis. But just listen to this group of quarterbacks around whom Roethlisberger's grade was last season. Taysom Hill, Andy Dalton, Mike Glennon, Ben Roethlisberger, Cam Newton, Alex Smith, Nick Foles, Teddy Bridgewater, Gardner Minshew. Like, that's the group he was in last season just in terms of overall PFF passing grade. That's a pretty rough place to be.
Yeah, I mean, we made the point that even when they were 11-0, they were, Big Ben had some rough games in there, some turnover luck, all that stuff, right? So if he gets better, which is not out of the realm of possibility, Chase Claypool becomes the star, I'm saying. They scheme it up a little bit offensively, and then the defense is another. They don't have to be a top 3 unit again, but they're good. I mean, that is a best case scenario, I think, for the Steelers. Your thoughts on that? Like, are you that same boat?
I mean, if Roethlisberger jumps up 10 grading points, that puts him in the Matthew Stafford, Justin Herbert, Kyler Murray world, which I think makes Pittsburgh a good team. Their defense should still be really good. If he's playing at that level, the offense is more than good enough for them to win a lot of games, and I think they are contending for the playoffs. They're in a really tough division. I don't know if they make it, but they're certainly, I would say they're chasing double-digit wins and the wild card spot.
Worst case scenario?
The offensive line is miserable. Roethlisberger doesn't get any better, and the Steelers' offense is prohibitively useless. And in today's world, it doesn't matter how good your defense is if your offense sucks.
I really think there are two extreme worlds. Roethlisberger turns back the clock, or
implodes.
It all falls apart, and we're talking about the Steelers fans are like watching Oklahoma film. Where's Spencer Rattler? We'll get Spencer Rattler in Pittsburgh next year.
I think their defense is too good for them to ever be in that conversation.
I know.
So the worst case scenario, I don't think encompasses having one of the top couple of picks in the draft. Like, they're too good for that. And also, Mike Tomlin is too good for that, by the way.
Agree with that.
That guy's had like 15 straight years of like 500 or better. They are not winning 2 games this year and shooting for the number 1 overall pick. It's just not happening.
All right, we're going to talk about the Ravens, but first, got to tell you about our friends over at DraftKings. College football season just around the corner. To celebrate, DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook app, is putting new players in the center of the action with $200 in free bets instantly if you bet $1 or more on any college football game. That sounds easy enough. DraftKings Sportsbook is safe, secure, and reliable, located right here in the United States, so it's easy to deposit and withdraw your money at your convenience. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use promo code PFF to receive $200 in free bets when you place a $1 bet on any college football game. Promo code PFF to get your free $200 in free bets instantly for a limited time only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. What a professional.
I was on a radio hit yesterday, and they had the same read, and they had a guy doing the
They weren't as good as me.
It wasn't as smooth. Though your read, I'm certain, has like at least one extra only than it should in there. It doesn't. There seems to be an extra word in there.
I just read whatever's there.
I just read what's on the sheet. The over/under, by the way, for Pittsburgh at DraftKings, 8.5.
I'm going to lean over because I've been as negative as we've been at their team building effort, and as many questions as I have, I've got this inkling that Big Ben's better and that some of the best case scenario stuff does happen.
I'm going under, but I think they'll win 8 games.
They won 8 with Duck is the thing
yeah.
that I can't wrap my head around. With Duck as the quarterback, Duck and Rudolph, they won 8.
Yes. But they had a better offensive line.
And
their offensive line wasn't bad.
They played horrible quarterbacks that year. Like, I get it. They were better from an offensive line standpoint. But
now you're dealing with a terrible offensive line and a division that suddenly has 2 contenders in it.
Yeah, the division does scare me a little bit for all these teams.
So as I say, under, but only by half a game.
Understood. I got you. All right, let's talk Ravens, man. A lot to discuss here. The Ravens, last year at this time, coming off a 14-win season. The big question, can they ever win a playoff game? They did win a playoff game last year. Still the question, though, their run-heavy attack, is that the thing that will propel them to the Super Bowl? Can they be more efficient in the pass game when they need to be? Because if you're just talking pass game efficiency, again, in 2019, Lamar wins the MVP. They're as efficient as it gets from a pass game standpoint. Their run game was so good that it would have ranked 7th among pass games that year. That just doesn't happen. But the Ravens are in a different world from a schematic standpoint because of what Lamar brings. So can they get over that hump where they're a little bit more well-rounded? And my big question mark is, can they win the games where the game flow isn't there?
We said there was no news. The only real bit of news actually relevant to the Ravens, Rashad Bateman, the guy supposed to kind of answer a lot of those questions, tweaked his groin, I think, running a slant against Marcus Peters, just pulled up, went down, pretty bad. That's going to keep him out for a good few weeks, possibly into the regular season. But that's a huge blow. Obviously, when you're relying on any one player fixing something like that, it's an important thing to have him there. But particularly when he's a rookie, like, you really wanted that preseason and training camp in totality to be able to roll into the regular season confident that he can be your number one and answer those questions. Now that's back up in the air, and can Sammy Watkins be that guy? The whole thing is, like, that's the Ravens season in a nutshell, is can the combination of Bateman, Sammy Watkins fix what ailed the passing attack?
Yeah, and just to compare to 2019 again, they lost Hayden Hurst, which doesn't sound huge on paper, but remember what they were doing. They had 3 legitimate tight ends with Mark Andrews, who's one of the better receiving tight ends in the NFL. Hayden Hurst is a good number 2 tight end, and Nick Boyle is one of the better run-blocking tight ends and a reasonable receiver. They were just doing a good job of creating mismatches, right? So if you don't have those star receivers, you can rely on your tight ends and just do things differently. Clearly the Ravens, though, said, again, we need to have options. We want to have answers if the run game isn't as efficient or if they do take away the tight ends. So relying on Sammy Watkins or a Rashad Bateman, which again takes pressure off Marquise Brown, who's a very good – I mean, if Marquise Brown is the number 2 or 3 threat on this offense and you're moving him around to the slot and outside and use his speed and everything, you could see the danger that they're creating for defenses. But yeah, I'm with you. So much depends on the receiver health and performance. And it's a big question mark still.
Yeah, and critically, like, we don't know that that's the problem. Like, that this is an attempt for Baltimore to solve the issue, and if they can't solve the issue, at least make a determination as to what the issue is. Right now, I don't think they or we know if the issues with the offensive passing game are because they don't have that number 1 X receiver that can win all over the field in all levels of the field against all cornerbacks. It doesn't look like Marquise Brown is that guy right now, but can Rashad Bateman or Sammy Watkins essentially put that player in the offense? Does everything change in a heartbeat? Or is it something more fundamental and insidious to the whole thing? Have teams worked out this offense now? Remember, this is a kind of a new system crafted from nothing around Lamar Jackson and that run game and the fact that the quarterback can be this extra threat that teams need to account for. It's going to take some time to figure out how to deal with that. And now they've been doing it for long enough that if it was going to be figured out, now would be the time. So is this a case of defenses have just caught up and, like the Sean McVay thing, this offense hasn't moved on. It hasn't developed. It hasn't added anything. So now, like, it wasn't an irresistible force, right? There was an answer to how to defend this offense. It just took teams a while to figure out what it is. And now that they have, you need to develop it. If that's the issue, then Bateman or Watkins or Marquise Brown, it's not going to make a difference.
Ali Villanueva comes over
to
play right tackle to replace Orlando Brown.
Struggling, by the way, so far in training camp.
Yeah,
Valley.
look, I mean,
in pass protection, which is the thing that he's
that's the thing he's
supposed to be
generally
good at.
been good at, and that's the thing that the system should protect you with a little bit. And theoretically, I will say, as much as I touted him this entire offseason,
No.
as a
Don't
scheme,
you dare
as
walk
a
this
fit,
back.
I liked him going to the Colts or the Chiefs as a fit. First off, they're moving him to right tackle. Hasn't
Yes.
done that in 5 years. That is risky.
Sure.
It is a risky move to move a veteran from left to right, just because it is different footwork and it does take time. There's risk involved there. And I will say, as a scheme fit, I didn't love the Ravens because Villanueva's run blocking has been far below his pass blocking, and this is a run heavy attack.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I still think it was a good move to have a drop off from Orlando Brown to Villanueva, which I think they have a small drop off. In exchange for that first round pick that they got for Orlando Brown and knowing that they couldn't pay him and all that stuff. I think the process is still sound. But I do think the interior wasn't great last year either. Kevin Zeitler comes in and should shore that up a little bit. Ronnie Stanley coming back healthy will be big. He's been one of the better left tackles in the league over the last couple of years. So again, there's a lot to like about the Ravens. J.K. Dobbins, they drafted him in the second round. Again, a forward-looking organization that said we still want to be good at the running back position, and Dobbins and Gus Edwards do give him that ability to create above and beyond what's given there. So there's a lot to like about this Ravens offense, but year 4 for these quarterbacks, year 4 for Lamar and for Baker and all that stuff, I think it's a big one. I think you've got an MVP caliber season for Lamar, and he regressed last year. He just did. So what is he? Is he somewhere in between? Can he get back to that MVP level? I think these are fair questions, and year 4 I think is very telling for a lot of these guys.
But also, this is connected with the conversation we just had in terms of the offensive scheme and whether it is.
You think they caught up? You think they caught the league off balance in 2019?
I mean, they definitely did, right? The question is, though, is that a permanent thing? Can you get back to that level because the things that you do on offense are essentially undefendable, right? Because Lamar Jackson is a singularly unique cheat code, right? The dude is like 2004 Michael Vick Madden, where you could just run around all day and win games single-handedly because he was too good in the game.
Yes.
Or go back to like Bo Jackson and Temco Bowl or whatever.
Tecmo Bowl, yeah.
Yeah. Is he that level of freakish athlete, or was the offense that you built around him just so different from everybody else's offense that it took teams a while to figure out exactly how you need to defend that? And once you have, it's still good, but it's no longer like impossible to stop. And if that's the case, where the offense that you've built around him is just good, not great, or good, not unstoppable, do you now need to relate that to how much money you're paying him, right? Like if the idea that his ceiling is MVP and best offensive weapon in the NFL, that might not be the case if teams have now caught up and the offense has a lower ceiling than you thought it did or than it once did.
Shout out to our guy Beckett over here behind the scenes, pushing some tweets forward to get with a little bit more information on the Rashad Bateman injury. I don't want to pronounce Jeff Zrebiak. Whatever, doesn't matter.
Want to pronounce and
Jeff.
Just did. Okay.
I don't want to pronounce it. Jeff Z on Twitter.
You just did. You can't. What's the point in doing it now?
I prefaced it by saying I don't want to do it. So
I don't want to pronounce
up, I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it anyway.
Then go back to Jeff Z.
Jeff Z on Twitter says John Harbaugh is saying Rashad Bateman will have groin surgery. He'll be back some point in September. And then PFF's own Mario talks about probably a sports hernia would be the timeline there. So we're talking sports hernia, recovery from surgery is about 6 weeks. And, so that puts it in that late September, early
he's
October.
Probably missing a month of the season plus the entirety of what's left of preseason. You mentioned the point, though. Reps for a rookie receiver are crucial. And you have to wonder how much Rashad Bateman, will it take him till November to actually be an impact player without that time? So it's a massive question there. Going to the defensive side of the ball, again, the Ravens have done a really good job. I think schematically they're right up there with the Steelers as far as blitz rate goes. They have they've had a very clear and defined strategy the last couple of years. Load up in the secondary and scheme up the pressure up front. Though this year what a group of edge rushers they have stitched together. And from a team building effort, we like this strategy. I like this strategy. Tyus Bowser, they re-signed on the cheap. He's been a good, solid all-around player for them. Pernell McPhee's back, veteran.
They draft Odafe Owe in the first round, freak athlete, edge rusher from Penn State. They bring Justin Houston in via free agency, who's clearly taken a step back, but those guys late in their career always intrigue me in 300, 400 snap samples if you just make them specialists. So they're going to stitch together this pass rush, and like most teams, their success will come down to their depth in their secondary.
Yeah, I like the defense. I think the defense is still going to be an extremely good unit. We've talked before about how they build things in a pretty intelligent way. I'm curious to see what kind of a step forward Patrick Queen can have in year 2. He's, I think, very emblematic of what the linebacker position is right now, which is, he was this fast, athletic, playmaking kind of linebacker and made a lot of plays in year 1, but also got torched and beat up and physically overwhelmed, and that's why overall his PFF grade was like 29. Now, that doesn't mean that the people that love what he could do are crazy. It just means that he needs to adapt essentially to what linebackers are stuck with in today's NFL. And I think there is scope for those guys to get a lot better, but there's also scope for him. There's also scope for you need to improve that. Otherwise, you end up like Tremaine Edmonds, which is like a highlight reel player, but a guy who overall is getting exposed a lot.
Yeah, Queen's got to do a much better job taking on blocks. 23 missed tackles, including the playoffs. He had one in the playoffs, but 22 during the regular season is absurd. I mean, that is literally 4 years of Bobby Wagner's career to get 22, right? I mean, that's an absurd number, including 5 against Pittsburgh in a game, many multiple missed tackle games. So a lot of room to improve for Patrick Queen. We mentioned the secondary. Marlon Humphrey, one of just the best young corners in today's NFL. And going back to my analysis on which teams ask the most of their corners, it's generally man-heavy type of teams. And the Ravens are up there. So Humphrey not only has a lot in his plate from hey, go man up against this opposing receiver, but he's played in the slot, played outside. He had that peanut punch added to his game last year with 9 forced fumbles. Humphrey and Marcus Peters, this is going to sound really generic, right? It's all about turnovers. Mm-hmm. But when you have a lot of the Ravens season, the way Humphrey plays and the way Marcus Peters plays, kind of volatile players, but they force turnovers. If they are turnover machines this year, that's also one of those things where if just the turnover luck goes your way, can really just elevate your team. And I think Peters and Humphrey are the 2 guys that could really turn the fortunes of the Ravens.
Baltimore also has like their own version of Jason Verrett. Tavon Young is potentially coming back after basically missing 2 straight seasons, like almost the entirety of the last 2 years in total. He's potentially like a genuinely high-level slot cornerback who they haven't had essentially for the last couple of years. If they suddenly get him healthy out of nowhere and he comes back and actually stays intact for the season, like adding him to Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey would just be such a huge, I don't want to say unexpected bonus, because I'm sure at some point they expected him to come back healthy, but like just a huge boost.
I view it more as Tavon Young plus Jimmy Smith equal 1 number 3 corner, because Jimmy Smith is out there, 400, 500 snaps per year too.
He just got hurt though.
Did he?
I don't know how long he's down for. Avoided serious injury after being carted off.
We don't want. I mean, it's good that he avoided serious injury.
Yes.
That's not what my reaction was. Yeah. But Jimmy's been banged up quite a bit, but always just a good, solid outside corner. Don't forget Calais Campbell's, up front. It does seem like the Ravens have tried to get a few more guys who can win one-on-ones. Does that mean they blitz a little bit less, change things up? But here's their big question defensively. We've talked about this a little bit. They got to figure out how to beat the Chiefs. They have to figure out how they can scheme it up to beat the Chiefs. Because Mahomes and the Chiefs seem to just always have answers for this Ravens defense. Yeah,
I mean, best case scenario for the Ravens is that their offense gets back to where it was a couple of years ago, where it was essentially the most unstoppable force in the NFL. That, okay, Bateman's going to miss a bit of time, but the combination of Bateman and Sammy Watkins is what was ailing this offense. They just didn't have that number 1 receiver, and when you add that guy in, the offense goes back to being as unstoppable as it ever was, and all as well.
Over-under for the Ravens is 11.
Man, that's rich.
Doesn't that feel high?
It feels high only in terms of like over-unders. You think 11 wins in a 17-game schedule.
It's reasonable. It happens all the time.
Yeah. But when you look at like team totals over-under, they're always lower than you think they should be. And 11, it feels pretty rich, particularly when you just look at the rest of the teams in the division, right? Pittsburgh, 8.5. We'll get to the Browns next, 9.5. The Ravens at 11 is rich.
I might go under on this one.
I'm going to go over, but I don't like it.
Yeah. I like the Ravens. I think it's interesting to me. We'll talk about the Browns in a second here. The Ravens are, much higher than the Browns. The Browns are at 9.5.
Yeah.
To me, it's neck and neck up
Agreed.
there, right? So I'm going to lean under on the Ravens here, though I do think when we pick a division winner, it might be the Ravens for me. But I think it's
like the
between
Chiefs,
them
for
and the Browns.
example, are 12.5.
Yeah,
that's as high as it's getting in terms of win totals.
The Packers are 10.5.
Yeah, the
So
Bucks
the
are
Ravens
12. The Bucks are the
Ravens
Super Bowl champions who maybe got better, and they're 12. So you're saying what Vegas is saying is that the Ravens are only one win worse, essentially, than the best team in the NFL.
All right, I'll go under on the Ravens. Let's go Browns here. Talk about the year 4 question mark. Baker Mayfield, excellent as a rookie, big step back as a sophomore. Looked like it carried into his 3rd year, and then boom, since week 7, number 2 graded quarterback. You know how we do it. You got to pull out the bad weeks, and you got a really good quarterback. So, what is Baker Mayfield? That's my biggest question mark here. They're gonna lock him up just before the season. They're gonna make him play it out a little bit.
I don't think there's any way they get that done before the season now with that Josh Allen contract.
I agree.
They're gonna have to let him play.
I feel like the Browns will view this as, we want as much information as possible before making our decision, and if we have to pay a few more $1 million for a guy that we have more faith in, we're willing to do that.
This seems like a contract that might go the Dak Prescott route, right? Which is we want as much time as humanly possible to figure out what Baker Mayfield actually is and how much we should pay for that. And if it ends up costing us a bit more money in the process, that's way better than having a Carson Wentz contract where 12 months later we want to get the hell out of here and we're saddled with this giant albatross of a contract we can't get rid of.
I was asked the question, because when I do my Mississippi radio hits, they always ask about Dak, Mississippi State guy and everything. They love Dak down there, and they gave me a lot of Dak or Lamar. Dak. They asked me Dak or Baker. And I think that's a fair question, and I think it's a fair proxy for each other. I mean, Dak, after 4 years, had 2 really good seasons and 2 okay seasons.
And they were very heavily influenced by everything around him.
They were, but it also got to this point in year 4, and I think it carried into last year for Dak, where you just felt like, okay, given the current quarterback landscape, I think he's in the top half of quarterbacks. He's probably top 10 or top 8. I think Baker, with a good season, solidifies that. And you say, okay, 3 out of his 4 NFL seasons are good. They're workable. We can win with this. And plus 3 college seasons, for whatever it's worth, they still matter a little bit, right? So I think this is just a huge year for Baker Mayfield.
It's a lot like the Dak situation where you were going into that season saying the price is not getting cheaper. Look at the situation that Dak is now in. This is the best situation of his career. Okay, he got hurt and that complicated things, but up until that point, it was playing out that way. Him throwing to those incredible receivers with an offensive line that was doing well at the time, Dak was having a career year. Baker Mayfield is set up to go into the season and have a career year because the offensive line, I think we rank number 1 in the NFL, right? The PFF offensive line rankings.
Yep.
The system is a proven quality system that A, functions, and B, helps elevate the play of quarterbacks. He's finally getting that group of receivers back and together and healthy for the first time. Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, Rashad Higgins, who he seems to have this weird connection with regardless of what else happens. Anthony Schwartz, who they added as a speedster. Donovan Peoples-Jones showed some skills last year.
Deep threat.
As a deep threat and as a speedster.
I like that mix.
There's a lot of players to throw to, and the defense just got a whole lot better. So Baker Mayfield this time next year should look a lot better than Baker Mayfield now. The question is, should that adjust what you think of him?
One other factor here, our guy Tej over at PFF.com, part of our R&D analytics team over here, he's doing some great work studying box count, and he's doing some, rushing yards work, over expectation, things that have kind of been done, replicating those and just getting some good data out of that. But one of the things he found was the ability to pass the ball against tight boxes as well. A lot of times we're like, hey, if there's 8 guys in the box, it's tougher to run the ball, but it's easier to pass the ball. And I think if you're putting quarterbacks together to compare them, you've mentioned before, is Baker Mayfield just Kirk Cousins? and let's throw Ryan Tannehill in there. Those are three guys who are in Shanahan tree type of offenses. I don't know if the exact tree is there for Tannehill, but it's play action, run heavy offenses where they're going to see tight condensed boxes, bigger passing lanes, a lot more people to move in the box with play action passing. So that is another thing that Kevin Stefanski's brought that is favorable for the quarterback. So again, how do you evaluate that? Do you say, well, Baker was put in a great situation, therefore he was great? But it's just another thing that shows the Browns as an offense have a lot of good answers for what defenses throw at them.
One of the interesting difference between Baker Mayfield's contract negotiation and Josh Allen's is that at no point do the Bills appear to have been at all concerned about what happens if Josh Allen becomes Jared Goff / Carson Wentz. Like, what happens if 24 months' time we're looking at this contract and we're like, oh man, we screwed this up. He's not the guy we thought he was. With Baker, I mean, I don't know this, but I would be quite surprised at this point if the Browns weren't at least considering that, because what makes these quarterback contracts so complicated is these are all the things you're juggling, right? You're juggling wanting the security of getting a superstar locked up for as long as humanly possible, because that's what you want, versus the risk mitigation if you're wrong. So the earlier you get the deal done, the cheaper it becomes, but also the less data you have to be sure that he's the guy. And then the longer you get it done, the better it is for your team to plan everything around this giant monster contract. But again, the more painful it is if you screw it up. So you have the Mahomes contract, you have the Josh Allen contract. Both those deals were done essentially with zero accord for what happens if he isn't the guy. Whereas with Baker, you're now probably trying to do this deal with one eye on the Jared Goff, Carson Wentz end of the spectrum, about like, okay, we want to reward Baker, he's our quarterback, but what happens if? Like, that feels like it has to be part of this contract in a way it wasn't. It maybe should have been, but wasn't in the Josh Allen deal.
How much do you think the Browns, again, smart front office, Andrew Berry there does a great job of meshing your traditional football and analytics, whatever you want to call it, right? How much does the history of the Browns matter? How much just having a starting quarterback? Andrew Berry didn't live it or anything like that, but just for the fans. I mean, the fan base matters a little bit in this whole thing. It's like, oh, we haven't had a starter since the 80s in Cleveland. How much does that matter? Where it's like, oh, you found a starter, he's top 15 at least. He's not worse than the 15th best quarterback in the league.
You would anyway
lock him up.
Yeah, you would be putting your head on a chopping block anyway if you were gutsy enough to say, you know what, we're not 100% convinced that Baker Mayfield is elite, and therefore we think we can get 90% of Baker Mayfield a hell of a lot cheaper. So we're not going to give him the $200 million contract, and we're going to walk away and roll with a Marcus Mariota or whatever it is, right? Go with an alternative. You would already be putting your head in a chopping block by making that call, and it would be incredibly brave. In Cleveland, it would be even more so, because you're like, hey, you know that jersey with the 8 million names going down to the floor? Baker stopped it, and yet we are voluntarily jumping back on that train because we believe the situation has changed and there's no longer a risk of creating another one of those jerseys.
I want to highlight the offensive line quickly, just highlight how good of a job the Browns did in building this thing. They had Joel Bitonio and J.C. Tretter there for a while, two of the better positions at their players at their positions, left guard, center. The tackles, don't forget, in 2019 were horrible. Greg Robinson was out there. They had Hubbard, was it, that was out there a bunch? I mean, Baker was, I don't know, peaking at the edge rushers quite a bit. They signed Jack Conklin at right tackle for a ton of money, has a career-high 84 grade. They draft Jedrick Wills in the first round to play left tackle. He had some ups and downs as a rookie, but I think he'll be a good player. And then right guard Wyatt Teller becomes the best run-blocking guard by our numbers last year in the NFL. Breaks out in year 3, 4, whatever that was in his career. A common thing around the NFL, a worthwhile risk, a guy that was really good in college and just, came into his own last year. And that all added up to being the best offensive line in the NFL. Bill Callahan, great offensive line coach. He's got a history of pulling it all together. So there's a lot of things to like about the Browns. And then you talk about the running backs. They did just sign Nick Chubb. They did give a second contract. We talked about that in the PFF NFL Daily. But with Chubb and with Kareem Hunt, again, I think offenses need options to win games. And there will be games where the Browns' rushing attack wins games for them, or is a big catalyst in winning games. And Nick Chubb is as good as it gets as a pure runner in the NFL.
I think that offense will be incredibly good, and I think Baker Mayfield will have a career year because of it. The interesting thing in terms of determining how good the Browns can be is how much better did they get on defense, because they overhauled a big portion of that defense, but now you're relying on a bunch of players coming in and hitting the ground running at the same time, which is just tough to do. So the fact that they added Troy Hill, Greg Newsome, John Johnson to that secondary and getting a guy like Greedy Williams back and all those new players, does that have the kind of transformative effect that they wanted to have, or is that going to take some time to work out, or is their strike rate high enough with the group that they added that it even did what it was supposed to?
The strategy is sound. Again,
yeah.
There was so many injuries in the secondary last year, but if Denzel Ward is healthy, I just love the fact that they drafted Greg Newsome, a corner out of Northwestern in the first round. Good long corner, can play man, can play zone. Troy Hill, who you mentioned. But when you look at the depth chart, Greedy Williams, we still don't really know what he is. He was a second-round pick a couple years ago, first-round caliber talent. He's got 863 snaps in his career, and that was 2019, had a 59 overall grade. So not relying on him is smart, but having him as a backup is great because he still could be a pretty good player. And the same thing with Grant Delpit, last year's second-round pick, didn't see the field at safety, playmaker out of LSU, but now he gets to kind of, ease his way in. And if he's a stud, maybe, he pushes Ronnie Harrison for playing time, or pushes Ronnie Harrison with his 6'3" frame into the box. And there's just so much flexibility, I think, with the Browns. And if you hear Andrew Berry and some of his press conferences and everything, they did focus on versatility. They draft Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah in the second round, a guy that's just played in the slot. He's a slot/linebacker at Notre Dame, that overhang role in college. So I can't wait to watch this secondary, the back seven really all come together.
Yeah, but I think it's going to be the thing that determines how good the Browns are, because the defensive front, I think, should be pretty good. Myles Garrett, if we haven't seen like a full season of Myles Garrett dominating yet. We've seen half seasons in each of the last couple of years. The first one, obviously, the Mason Rudolph helmet thing. He got himself suspended for the second half of the year. And then last year, caught COVID, wasn't quite the same guy down the stretch. We haven't seen this full totality of a season of Myles Garrett just being like the best defensive player in the NFL, or one of the best.
Which he's certainly capable of.
Absolutely, and has been in like half the years in each of the last two seasons. Jadeveon Clowney, this is his latest installment of betting on himself to try and get that monster contract that he wants at some point. Certainly having Myles Garrett opposite him won't hurt. That's definitely got to be a good thing. Malik Jackson coming in, I think, is a big part. Slowed down last year, but should still definitely be a significant impact player for them. And they've got some depth along that defensive line as well. Like, they've rolled the dice on a lot of players. I think that defensive front will be good. Owusu-Koramoah is an interesting X factor at sort of linebacker, and then how that secondary gels.
For perspective, Myles Garrett PFF grades over with, if you got your PFF Elite subscription, go to Premium Stats, 80 grade as a rookie, then 86, 86, 86, in that 86 point something range over the last 3 years. He did grade over 90 as a pass rusher each of the last 2 years, though. So if you're looking for a guy, it's weird to say Myles Garrett's going to break out, but if you're talking like a real breakout season, one of those 18 sack, ridiculous looking seasons, I think Myles Garrett has been on the cusp for a while, to your point.
Right. It's not like a breakout, but it's like, what happens if you get Defensive Player of the Year Myles Garrett for the whole season, as opposed to just a portion of it, which is what you've had the last couple of years.
And just to sum up Clowney really quick, he was always been a good, not great pass rusher. He's not now at that. It was a point where his sack totals were probably too high. Now they're too low. He's not a 3-sack guy. He's not a no-sack guy like he showed the last couple of years. If he stumbles into 8 this year, I wouldn't be surprised. So I think Clowney will be a good, solid addition over there. So 9.5 over/under for the Browns. You're going over. I can tell.
If the Browns weren't the Browns, we would be talking about this team as one of the top Super Bowl contenders in the NFL.
Just because the roster is that good.
The roster is so good. Okay, there's a question mark about how well that secondary will gel in year one, which isn't there for a team like Tampa Bay, right? So I think there is a gap between the Bucs and the Browns, in addition to the fact that, one has Tom Brady and the other one has Baker Mayfield, a quarterback. But there's not a big gap. Like, the gap between Tampa Bay and Cleveland is closer than the gap between Cleveland and, the Chargers, who were people's like dark horse for Super Bowls or whatever. Like the Browns, I think, should be seen as a real threat to anybody trying to win a Super Bowl.
I want to look defensive coordinator Joe Woods. I think there's a lot on him to make all of those pieces that we talked about, to make them all fit. All the defensive line depth that they've built, the secondary depth that they've built, tapping into all those skill sets and making them work. But I think from a team building standpoint, I think the front office has done a really good job of putting the pieces in place, to your point. So it comes down to the coaching staff, fitting that puzzle. I'm with you over on the Browns. I like it. Good division, but I like the Browns here, man. All right, let's go NFC North. We're starting with the Green Bay Packers. We're going to go Packers, Bears, Vikings, Lions.
Of course we are.
Obviously. Green Bay Packers, after all of that drama, Aaron Rodgers is back. Still have Devontae Adams. NFC championship participants over the last. Did they put banners up for those last couple?
I doubt it.
NFC championship
Title town. It's not. There's no title.
It's
there.
not participant town.
I mean, NFC North title, I guess. Maybe they put a banner for that.
They have some Central crowns as well through the years.
Yeah.
What do we make? I said we have to promise not to just say Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams are going to regress. That's not the story of the Packers, right? It can't be the only thing.
Sure.
My concern with the Packers, my big question is, can they have more help for Rodgers and Devontae Adams, right? This is different. This isn't a regression thing. Can they get they got good production out of their complementary receivers last year, but how much of that was just Rodgers was playing out of his mind, elevating Alan Lazard? If you guys listen to our in-season podcast, how much every time Marquez Valdez-Scantling makes a great play, it's like, all right, that was worth it. We'll suck it up. All the drops that he had, it's okay because there's a 50, 60-yarder in there every now and again. So I think the playmakers are okay when Rodgers is playing at that high level. But I think there are some question marks on the offensive line now. It's not as clean-cut as it's been in the last couple of years. Will there be enough support offensively and defensively for the superstars on this team is my big question.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the offense. My concern is the defense good enough to stop the best teams in the NFL? Because with Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams back in the fold, they're going to the playoffs again, at which point now you've got to focus on those teams. So the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, those are the teams that you need to start thinking about. All right, how do we beat them and get A, to the NFC Championship game, and then B, that final step to the Super Bowl? And even once you get into the Super Bowl, are you facing the Chiefs? Like, how the hell do we slow them down? So now you've got to start focusing on that. And is there enough talent on this defense to do that? Jair Alexander and Adrian Amos played fantastically last year. I think they have a lot of linemen / pass rushers that can be impact players. Kenny Clark being 100% healthy would be huge for them. Zadarius Smith has been very good, led the league in pressures, not last year, but the year before that. Rashawn Gary is potentially a breakout candidate this year and could really help if he can be the guy that Preston Smith was supposed to be, the complement to Zadarius, and be sort of two elite pass rushers. Preston Smith has been a bit of a disappointment in Green Bay. But if those guys all come together, that's a pretty good defensive front / line. The secondary still has major questions in terms of, you need to not be Kevin King again when you get to the big games. And also, there's no linebackers. I mean, they're not a unique case in terms of a team that just has a giant gaping hole at the middle level of the defense with no linebackers to speak of. But the Packers are one of the scariest examples of that.
I think it's another one of those teams, though, that has made that a team-building decision, right? I mean, Chris Barnes was an undrafted rookie that they trotted out there last year.
At some point, it's bad enough that it is a problem. I kind of agree with the idea that you shouldn't dedicate massive resources to it, but it still needs to be of a certain level.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the point, I think, from a team-building standpoint is there are position groups that you're more inclined that you need them to be strong. If you want to win games, you want them to be strong, and then every other position group, you just don't want them to be a weakness.
Yes, there's almost no position in the NFL where you actively want, or it's not a problem to have a legitimate replacement level player.
Yeah.
So linebacker might be amongst the positions where you want to dedicate the least amount of resources. But if your linebackers,
you don't want to be horrendous.
Right. If your linebackers are literally like guys I could go out on the waiver wire any day of the week and get two guys that are the same, you have a problem.
Yeah, so I think, look, the linebackers, so Chris Barnes, he had a 43 grade last year as a rookie. I think it's all about perspective, right? You have an undrafted rookie being trotted out there. It's kind of like a good story that he's starting, but in the scope of NFL linebacker play, it wasn't great. Devondre Campbell comes in to compete there. Ty Summers, Kamal Martin has shown some things, but yeah, it's not a strength on this team.
Your guy, Oren Burks.
Oren Burks.
With his 28 grade.
Listen. My Oren Burks story. The first game we ever graded for PFF College. I think it was Vanderbilt Temple. I think PJ Walker was the quarterback back then.
Yeah.
So we started grading in 2014. Sometimes you have a soft spot for, the first thing you saw. It's like your first love. So the first guy that caught my eye in a PFF College game back in 2014 was Oren Burks for Vanderbilt, playing free safety. And then his Vanderbilt career, he became like a traditional linebacker at one point. He became an edge rusher at one point. I'm like, I love this versatility and all that stuff. Tested really well, and it just never graded well.
That was probably the same season that I got attached to Matt Ioannidis. That worked out better for me than your
It's
Oren Burks
easier
did.
to get attached to defensive linemen.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
So you picked the right position group to get attached to. I would have seen him that game too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You didn't. You instead you got.
I should switch.
Right. Your eye got caught by Oren Burks.
Anyway,
as a 28 grade.
Oren Burks is he has never graded above 45 in his 3 years with the Packers, but he's on the linebacker depth chart as well.
Yeah.
The biggest question mark, though, of course, is the Kevin King position. They bring him back to play cornerback, but they also drafted Eric Stokes in the first round. As great as Jair was, it's about that. What?
Oh, you're not gonna.
Jair Alexander is awesome. He's a great cornerback. He's on one side of the field. The question mark is what's going to happen on the other side of the field.
Okay. I thought you were just going to walk into the regression thing again.
No.
That's all.
No, I set the bear traps, and I know where they are this time.
You're way too mal-coordinated to avoid your own bear traps if left to your own devices.
Yeah,
you just walking through the office have torn your polo shirt.
I know.
Yeah.
It's very sad.
I'm just saying, just because you know where the bear traps are, don't mean you won't accidentally stumble your big-ass feet into them.
Big hole in my shirt because it got caught on the wall. Can we get the Under Armour sponsorship through here so I can get a replacement shirt? Can we get Connor, you upstairs listening? Can we get that Under Armour sponsorship sometime, please? I need new Under Armour shirts.
Yeah.
What is going to happen at cornerback? Kevin King was a free agent. He got destroyed. The last time we saw him was the NFC Championship. He gets wrecked by Mike Evans for a touchdown and then Scotty Miller for a touchdown. He's never graded above 62 in his 4-year career. Significant playing time. And Kevin King was an intriguing prospect. He's 6'3" with a ridiculous 3-cone. He's got all the skills. He just never...
And at times hasn't played terribly.
Yes, an NFL player is going to have times where he plays well. The problem is there's no skill sets that Kevin King can hang his hat on that he's really good at. Sometimes you have, he's a zone corner playing in a man scheme or whatever it is. He's not great one-on-one. He doesn't have great zone instincts, and they're bringing in the Fangio-Staley scheme potentially here, right? I don't think that's a good fit for Kevin King and his skill set.
It's not, but equally, it doesn't feel like a great fit for Eric Stokes,
True.
Who was the guy brought in the first round to replace him. That, to me, is the really intriguing thing. It's like, okay, first-round cornerback, 100% on board. Kevin King was a disaster. You absolutely need to replace him as your other starting cornerback, particularly when the number one guy is amazing, because soon you're going to get this Nnamdi Asamoah situation where it's like, why would you ever throw the ball at Jair Alexander when on the other side is Kevin King? Like, that guy should get all of the targets. So absolutely bring in a guy, but you bring in a guy who doesn't seem tremendously well-suited for this defensive scheme, which is, it's just a curious move.
What are you expecting from the Packers What are you expecting from Aaron Rodgers this year?
Well, they can't go 13-3 again because there's an extra game in there.
You don't think they'll go 13-3?
I don't. No.
You don't think
In fact,
they'll have
reasonably certain they won't.
You don't think they'll have a game canceled and they'll go 13-3?
Well, even if they do, they forfeit the game, right?
Somebody would, yeah.
Yeah. So it wouldn't be 13-3. There's no way. The only way they can go 13-3 is if they go 13-3-1.
I want to paint the Aaron Rodgers picture here for you.
Okay.
The analytics community echo chamber was absolutely trashing him for years because they were just looking at EPA and on-field production, which I
had slipped a lot.
And that stuff did go down, and I believe that is a more team-driven stat. I think the PFF grade always was a little bit higher for Rodgers.
But had slipped a lot.
And here's what 2017, 79. 2018, 89. Right? 18 was probably the year where he had the 25-2 touchdown interception ratio, whatever. But
that was a relative bounce back for him because the next year was 84.
Yes, in both of those years, I think he played pretty good football. But even like the production was down.
Yeah.
Last year he's up at a 95 grade, 94.7 passing grade, and that was right up there. That looked like his 2011, his 2014, that stretch in 2016. Yeah. So when you look at the totality of Aaron Rodgers' career, I just named 4 periods of time where Aaron Rodgers, it was like everything was great. Everything about him was great. Everything he did was great. He is this special player of big time throws and never putting the ball in harm's way. But it's really like 4 stretches of play. And outside of that, it's not like he's been bad. He's been very, very, very good. But I do think a lot of the Packers' season will depend here on, is it the elite? Is it a 5th period of time where Aaron Rodgers is in a different world? Or is he just a top 3 or 4 quarterback, not
in
the
which
pinnacle?
Case, the most obvious question we need to answer is, last season, Rodgers was pissed off. They just drafted his replacement. It was the start of the bad blood between them all. It was the Aaron Rodgers revenge tour. He was going out there to prove that he was still Aaron Rodgers, and you guys have wasted this draft pick bringing in a guy who's never going to replace me. And off he goes, MVP Aaron Rodgers, highest PFF grade of his career, puts the Packers back in the NFC Championship game. Now, how pissed off is he going into the season? The offseason drama of won't he come back? Will he go host Jeopardy? Whatever. He then reports to training camp and he's all smiles and happy, and they bring in Randall Cobb because that's the thing that's going to make him pleased.
I forgot to mention Randall Cobb's here.
Yeah. But they haven't actually done anything in terms of like addressing his concerns. You know what I mean? Like they haven't, all the stuff that he wanted, right? I want to be involved in these discussions. I want to be recruiting, blah, blah, blah. All these things that he wanted to be part of. He isn't. The only thing they've done has been like, well, he wanted Randall Cobb. Let's get Randall Cobb and shut him up. So how pissed off is Aaron Rodgers going into this season?
I think he's pissed off enough. I really think this stuff. I do think this stuff matters. I've said this before.
It 100% matters for like deranged lunatics like Rodgers and Tom Brady.
That's right. The elite,
Michael Jordan,
the elite guys. Yeah. I think it does matter, and I think it is so overblown when announcers just say this guy's got a chip on his shoulder. It's like, all right, everybody's got chips on their shoulder, right? But only certain athletes can do so. Can eat the chip, so to speak.
Can eat the
Doesn't
chip?
make any sense.
That makes no sense
Doesn't
whatsoever. What are you doing?
Only some people can actually use the chip that's on their shoulder.
I thought you were going to say metaphors because.
Oh no, I'm not even. Only some people can do it, and I think Rodgers he wants to win a championship for himself, even if it's not for Green Bay and the people that have aggravated him, and he wants to be coveted in the offseason. I think he wants to be in the middle of that trade drama. Is it the Broncos? Is it the Raiders? Is it the Eagles? Like, who's going to get Aaron Rodgers? I think he wants to be a part of that, and he wants to have a big season to make that happen. So let me go back to the offensive line really quickly, though. Billy Turner is their starting right tackle, potentially. Billy Turner's turned into like a decent guard. Never really had an extended period of time where he's played well at right tackle. Lucas Patrick, okay, at right guard. They drafted Josh Myers, never graded above 73.
Yeah, that's a curious
in
one.
college. He was a second-round pick out of Ohio State. Big guy. They talked about they just wanted size up front, but they got a guy that hasn't really played all that well. Elgton Jenkins is really good. David Bakhtiari is probably the best left tackle in the NFL. So that's 2 good players, and I would say 3 legitimate question marks on that offensive line. They have not trotted out an offensive line like that in a few years with that many questions.
Underrated smart move was signing Dennis Kelly, who's been the sort of emergency right tackle for a couple of years in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Like when things go south, you bring in Dennis Kelly and you're like, oh, that's going to be a problem. And it actually hasn't been. So
yeah, and he's not great, but if Kelly ends up playing right tackle and you kicked Billy Turner into guard, it might actually bring a little bit more security.
That's what I'm saying. So like if Billy Turner is a disaster at right tackle, I think you have a very good contingency plan in Dennis Kelly, which would have been easy not to do. Like that was a smart signing to bring him in and give you that capability.
The other thing I'll say is Devontae Adams was uncoverable last year. Are they too fragile? If he gets hurt or something happens,
And he has missed time.
he's been banged up at times. So Alan Lazard has this great connection with Rodgers. He was fantastic.
also been banged up a lot.
And he's been banged up a lot. They bring back Randall Cobb, who's getting older, but still only, 30 years. He's only 30 years old. Feels like he's been in the league like 10 years. What does he
Randall
have
Cobb
left?
is only
He's still a reasonable slot receiver. And then they drafted Amari Rodgers, who has a Randall Cobb type of skill set in the slot. So they might have enough weapons there.
Yeah.
And then Valdez-Scantling, who's going to be good for some, deep passes and drops.
As I said, I'm not concerned about the offense. I think that will be very good.
All comes down to the defense.
Yeah.
10.5 over under Packers.
Over.
I'll also
Like an
go
extra
over.
game to do it. Over. 12 wins? Sure.
I'm going over. Is Aaron Rodgers going to regress?
I'm not doing it. I'm not falling into the bear trap. I have more nimble dexterity than you do.
You have 3 more teams here, Sam. Chicago Bears. We're moving swiftly here. Chicago
I
Bears.
don't think we are.
How excited are they with Justin Fields here? What are we getting with Justin Fields
Well, we're getting Andy Dalton. That's what we're getting.
for now?
Andy Dalton, by the way, is doing sterling work trying to harness all of the ginger talent because he's grown a beard. Have you seen it? It's glorious.
That's right. Yeah. So he's now we need to figure out the timing.
He has
now. Listen to
an
this.
amazing ginger beard.
His ginger beard is growing, and all of a sudden, Carson Wentz gets hurt. I'm just saying, somebody who came up. Where's my listener? Our listener that came up.
There's a
with the
big chunk
ginger
of people
theory.
have no earthly idea what the hell we're talking about right
So
now.
the ginger theory was a fun one a couple years ago. One of our listeners came up with and said, "There's only so much ginger red hair talent in the NFL
Yeah.
at any given time." And if you go back through history,
It's always been harnessed by one person.
right, the
exclusion
it's
of the
usually
others.
harnessed by one person, but sometimes you could spread it out and all this stuff. So there was one year where like Carson Palmer was the best quarterback in the NFL. One year, Andy Dalton was the best out of all the ginger talent and all that stuff. It was just a. But then you started to see like when one guy would do well, the other two would get hurt.
Right. Or just be terrible.
Or be terrible. So the theory now that Andy Dalton has increased the ginger coverage with a beard, and then Carson Wentz, a fellow ginger, gets hurt, there might be some truth to this.
And it is a glorious beard. I mean, look,
Did we put Darnold in the ginger? He's not there, right?
I think
In
he
this
was.
category?
He's always been on the bad side, so it always worked.
He's never stolen any ginger talent.
Right. No, never had any of it. Growing a beard can go a couple of different ways. Like there's some bad beards out there, and there's some people that really persist in a terrible beard. Like Amari Cooper. Have you seen his beard?
Is that a ginger beard?
I mean, there's red in my beard. I don't know if I would go as far as to say it's ginger.
Did Wentz get hurt after you?
After I cut it, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe you did it.
Maybe I influenced the ginger talent. Just unbeknownst to me. But have you seen Amari Cooper's beard?
No, I haven't been keeping tabs on the camp beards this
That
year.
thing's pretty rough. Like that's a patchy, it's weak coverage. It's not. It doesn't look good. It's not a good look. But yet that dude persists in it. Like he's not getting rid. Whereas Andy Dalton's phenomenal coverage. There's some flow to it. There's some wave to it. It catches the light. That man is doing everything in his power to harness all of the ginger talent to stave off Justin Fields, keep him on the bench.
I think it's hilarious.
And he needs to because, it's not going to be long before he gets pulled off
ginger
the
theory.
field and
Here's-
the backup thrown in.
We went on about this at one point in the offseason. I don't think Andy Dalton really matters in this equation.
I think he 100% matters.
I think he's the placeholder.
Yeah, but he's going to determine the length of time that Justin Fields is sitting on the bench is 100% Andy Dalton driven.
No,
Yes.
it's Justin Fields driven.
It's not. It's not even slightly Justin Fields driven.
driven.
They have determined that Andy Dalton is the starting quarterback going
No.
into week one, which
They-
will be the case
No.
as long as Andy Dalton plays well.
What they have determined is that they don't want Justin Fields starting immediately. There's two schools of thought. Your guy either starts or he sits. They've gone with, we want our first-round quarterback to sit. Right.
And he will sit
But that is
until
for
the starter forces him to do
indeterminate
something
amount
different.
of time he's going to sit. And that time will be determined not by how well Andy Dalton plays, because you know what Andy Dalton is. And if he's playing great, he's going to regress. If he's playing poorly, he'll get better. You know what Andy Dalton is.
Yeah, but
They have made those
might not
decisions.
know.
They have made this decision based off of Justin Fields and his development. And as soon as they feel he's ready, whether it's week 2 or week 18, Justin Fields is playing football.
Their blueprint for this is Patrick Mahomes. They want to go Patrick Mahomes route of he will sit for the entirety of his rookie year, and we have a starter who's capable of doing that.
You didn't listen to the Chris Collinsworth podcast with Matt Nagy.
Matt Nagy was the coordinator then.
Yes. He said, yes, there is an element to the Mahomes blueprint, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's got to be 16 games like Mahomes sat, or 16 weeks and then he played the last week.
Because he knows full well that Mahomes or that Andy Dalton is not going to have an Alex Smith season that keeps him on the bench for 16 games.
It's not an exact blueprint. The only thing that's the same is he's going to sit. When Justin Fields is ready to play football, he's playing football. Now, here's the intriguing thing. There's a case to be made that Matt Nagy has done a fantastic job of coaching football over the last few years. As difficult as it's been maybe to be a Bears fan, they were great in 2018, and they've snuck into the playoffs last year and all this stuff, despite having bottom 5 quarterback play in the NFL with Mitchell Trubisky. So if Justin Fields didn't even show up, and we were poo-pooing all of the Bears' moves and all that stuff, you could look at this objectively and say they're about to get the best quarterback play they've had in years with Matt Nagy, who's done a pretty good job overall, and a solid defense and whatever. Maybe Andy Dalton was going to give them their best opportunity to win in a while. Now, I do think the rest of the roster's gotten a little bit worse. So I don't know how great the Bears are going to be, but I'm just in disagreement with you that Andy Dalton's play is going to determine Justin Fields' future. I think it's all about when they think Fields is ready.
You're telling me that Patrick Mahomes wasn't ready before Week 17 that year?
When they felt he was ready.
You're telling me they didn't feel he was ready until Week 17 that season. And by the way, it wasn't even then because they put him back on the bench for the playoffs. You're telling me they didn't think that Patrick Mahomes was ready to play until the following season.
Yeah.
I would say that you're a liar. You don't believe that, and it's not true.
Alex Smith was leading the league in passer rating.
Exactly. So the
Alex Smith was playing really well.
The starter is what determined when that backup came in. Everybody that thinks, right, we're going to sit this quarterback, and we're only going to play him when he's ready to see the field. Never in the history of the NFL has that actually been the case. It has always been determined by whether the starter is playing well or badly enough to be on the field. Andy Dalton will start the season, and if he has 2 crappy games in a row, he will be sitting on the bench for Week 3, and Justin Fields will be on the field. On the other hand, if Andy Dalton starts the season on fire, plays like Alex Smith in that 2017 season, Andy Dalton will be the starter for most of the year. And it won't be until he wobbles that they will pull Justin Fields off the bench and throw him out there.
Well, I strongly disagree with this strategy. You do what's best for your first-round quarterback. What do we expect from Fields? I mean, I think he's the most intriguing first-round quarterback.
Yes. To
figure out what he is. I don't want to rehash all of the stuff the NFL passed on him and all that.
He's also intriguing because there's this evangelical element now to Justin Fields' stands, to the people that think that Justin Fields is like the best quarterback we've ever seen. Like, it's starting to get a little bit out of control.
Of course.
In terms of like...
This is a shocking turn of events in social media world.
It's ridiculous that he slipped in the draft, and all these teams that passed on him are morons, and like, how could you do this because Justin Fields is a slam dunk prospect and blah, 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 right? It's starting to get a little bit crazy. I like Justin Fields, and I think the things he does well are incredible, and there's a lot of selling points to his game, but there were concerning elements. Like the negatives to his game are not... Okay, some of the negatives to his game are not fabricated. Some of them were in the pre-draft process. But
I think...
Like, when you watch the tape, like, I come to the college tape after everybody else, right? I'm not, like, watching it religiously during the course of the season. We're too busy doing this. I sat down, watched some Justin Fields tape, way back at the start of this whole process. And, like, after 1 or 2 games, you were like, oh, this is a weird evaluation. Like, this is going to cause some problems. Like, the stuff that's good is amazing, but it's going to take some time to weed out or to navigate the other stuff.
I mentioned before around draft time, there is if you're trying to make comparisons for quarterbacks and you want to throw them into this continuum of where they could land, Justin Fields if you describe his skill set of very good thrower of the football, very accurate thrower of the football, holds the ball too long, takes too many sacks, can create yards on the ground with his legs, right? Those are the attributes, the traits or whatever. That can describe anywhere from Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson Then you go further, it's Ryan Tannehill. And then you go further down, and it's like Tyrod Taylor. So Josh Allen's in there somewhere, but Allen's kind of his special case drawn out way, right? I really think the Ryan Tannehill landing spot early in Fields' career is a fair one. And let's just describe what that is. Ryan Tannehill, for the majority of his career, was an average to above average quarterback. He was a good NFL quarterback, middle tier quarterback. And now he has taken a big step forward and has been fantastic over these last couple of years. I see Fields probably being better than that, but I think he's probably closer to Tannehill than he is Russell Wilson. If you're just projecting them forward, right?
Yeah.
But that could be a really good quarterback.
But the Russell, like a lot of people come to this Russell Wilson comp with him. Jimmy Graham just did it.
I saw that.
Reminds me of Russell Wilson. And I it's apt. It makes sense stylistically. There's a lot of Russell Wilson in him, like a jumbo-sized version of Russell Wilson. And stylistically, I think it fits as well.
I don't think he's the natural outside the pocket playmaker.
No, that's true.
I don't think he embraces that style.
And it isn't going to be a perfect
special
comparison, right? There's obviously going to be differences, but I do think it's natural to a lot of people, and which means there's probably something in it. Like too many people have independently come to the conclusion that Justin Fields reminds them of Russell Wilson in some way, shape, or form. And I think a lot of that is because they're going to land in the same area of style of play on that spectrum. And we just talked, a couple of episodes ago, if you go back and listen to our discussion on Russell Wilson and how unique he is as a quarterback and the challenges that poses for that offense. Like Russell Wilson is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, but the way he plays the game still causes enough problems that it's an issue for that team to navigate in terms of what that offense looks like, right? Now imagine that is the same thing for Justin Fields, only he isn't as good yet because he's a rookie. Now it's not this slam dunk of this guy's amazing, throw him out there.
Sounds like Ryan Tannehill.
Right. Now you're talking about a quarterback that has some problems to his game, that will cause some problems to his game. And oh, by the way, you have no offensive line. Like,
that's what I wanted to get to.
The Bears' offensive line is bad anyway. And have you seen like the injury reports for training camp? Like none of them are practicing. The whole offensive line is hurt right now.
Even if they're healthy, again, I look at offensive lines with, guys that you can expect good things from and then question marks. It's either or. Guys you can expect good, solid play from, Cody Whitehair and James Daniels. They're both
maybe
guys
with Cody Whitehair. Like he struggled.
Probably with Cody Whitehair.
Right, but he's been up and down.
They've been ridiculous with him moving back from center to guard, and Daniels, they've been moving them all around. It looks like they're going to project them to guard. Sam Mustipher, if he is playing center, big question mark. Tevin Jenkins, the right tackle out of Oklahoma that they're projecting to play left tackle. Excellent player in college. Mauler in the run game. Pass protection was still a question mark coming into the draft. Jermaine Ifedi, scheduled to be the starting right tackle. He played right tackle down the stretch, and he had some good games, some games where his pass blocking grade was in the 20s. That's the history of Jermaine Ifedi playing right tackle. He'd been better at guard historically.
Tevin Jenkins dealing with a back injury. He's missed all of training camp so far.
So he might not even be ready to go.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that's a question. Even the playmakers, I think they have a chance to be pretty good. Allen Robinson's a star. He's awesome. Darnell Mooney was really good as a rookie last year. So much speed, and I think they'll tap into his downfield ability. And then they'll find, Marquise Goodwin's in there, Javon Wims, Damiere Byrd. Like, they'll find a
And by the way,
three.
Remember, like we talk all the time about how a lot of the times teams are victims of, having to sleep in the bed that they made, or lie in the bed that you made this bed, now you lie in it. What the hell is that phrase? The Bears voluntarily cut Charles Leno.
Yeah.
Okay, it was a salary cap move, but, maybe there were ways to find enough money to cover Charles Leno's salary this year so that you weren't rolling into the season with a rookie left tackle with known back issues who hasn't played in training camp.
There's just a trickle-down effect there, right? Leno, league average left tackle. Jenkins, the rookie, can then play right tackle. Jermaine Ifedi, instead of playing right tackle, can play guard. James Daniels and Cody Whitehair, I forget the exact weight because they've just moved from guard to center all the time, but there was some combination that was best. So whatever that combination is, you move one of them to center, one of them to guard. There's a trickle-down effect to everybody else that gets the line closer to average. And right now they look like a below-average offensive line.
Well,
so
not just a below.
That's the other reason why maybe they, Andy, get out there. Andy, get out there, get rid of the ball quickly. And
I would say right now it looks like a significantly below average offensive line.
Ooh, you're being aggressive there. What about defensively here? They're another team. A couple of years ago, they were incredible. They've slowly had to, year over year, they've had to revamp this secondary. Eddie Jackson's still back there at safety. They bring back Tayshaun Gibson. Jalen Johnson, last year's first rounder, had good moments. Every rookie.
Second round, right?
Second rounder. See, sometimes he was a first rounder in
first
my
round
mock.
talent.
Yeah, first round talent. He's first rounder when I mock drafted for him. Jalen Johnson, I think they need a big second year from him. But even their starting secondary, who's up? Desmond Trufant, Artie Burns, Duke Shelley, Kendall Vildor. I mean, it's not the best looking secondary in the world either.
Yeah, Jalen Johnson was another one of those rookie corners that started off really well. It's like, oh, Jalen Johnson's this superstar, should have been a first rounder, second round pick, steal. And then, as with all those rookie corners, those guys eventually got torched over the course of the season, and he ended up with an overall grade of 55, which is not good, right? Now, was that just because the whole sophomore class of cornerbacks is fascinating because none of them were good.
Yeah.
They were all varying degrees of how badly you got beat, but ultimately they were all beat a lot. So now going into year 2, it's like, well, what kind of step forward are these guys going to take? We really like some of the things that Jalen Johnson did, but
all rookies in a COVID year too. I mean, there's
a lot going against them. But ultimately, if Johnson plays at a 55 again, that's a bad thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So if he doesn't take a massive step forward in year 2, they don't have a single corner that you're confident in shutting anybody down.
Khalil Mack, the classic PFF grade of 92.5, even though the sack totals weren't great. He just had a lot of quick wins that didn't necessarily show up on the field. Akeem Hicks wasn't his same dominant self when he was out there last year. Eddie Goldman coming off the nose tackle coming off an opt-out, right? Or an injury. Opt-out,
I think.
So I think the front seven should be solid. Robert Quinn is the pass rusher opposite Khalil Mack. He's just okay. They could have done better there. And Roquan Smith, from a coverage standpoint, has started to become that first-round player that we saw in college at Georgia. So look, I think the front seven's pretty good. My big question is how the secondary comes together. It sounds like the Steelers here. Secondary, offensive line.
Yeah,
it's going to be the biggest non-quarterback story for the Bears this year.
Yep.
Where are they? What's their over/under here? Scroll up. I'm not prepared, Sam. Just not prepared.
Take your time. Don't worry. This is
7.
7.
If Justin Fields is the starter, over. If Andy Dalton's the starter, under?
No, over either way.
You going over for the Bears?
They won 8 games with Trubisky at quarterback.
All right. Over for the Bears, over for the Packers.
Yeah.
Vikings are at 8.5, by the way. Let's get into the Vikings right now.
Let's do it.
Timer. Let's keep it tight on the Vikings. And then we get the Lions to wrap it up.
Go.
Best and worst case scenario for the Vikings this year. I think after all their drafting over the last couple of years, this youth movement, I do think they'll be better this year. I think they've added some depth.
Well, they're getting a lot of players back.
Yes. They're not without question marks.
Their defensive front. I mean, last year was the first defense that Mike Zimmer has put together in years that was just not good. And Zimmer was still doing his thing. The Vikings' numbers on third down were insane. And that's a Zimmer thing, right? Zimmer is dialing up stuff on third down to combat what offenses want to do. Zimmer is still as cutting edge as he ever was. It's just he didn't have the personnel anymore.
Let's hear some Vikings defensive rankings last year.
Okay.
27th in EPA per play allowed. 32nd in pass rush grade. So that's what we'll talk about, how getting Donnell Hunter back is a good start there. 29th in run defense grade. And then 18th in coverage grade. So the Zimmer defense certainly works better when they've got legitimate pass rushers up front. He sprinkles in the blitz nicely, and then they play sound coverage on the back end. Landing at 18th from a coverage standpoint wasn't bad considering how ugly it was at times last season.
On third down last year, number 2 in EPA per play allowed. The only team, they were better than the Rams last season in EPA per play allowed on third down.
Sorry, what was that? The Rams?
Yeah.
Just the Rams.
The league's number 1 defense, the Los Angeles Rams.
And then the Vikings.
Were third, and the Vikings were second. So, on third down, they were still incredible. And that's because Mike Zimmer knows what he's doing and was still able to scheme up and dial up blitzes and do whatever he was doing to make sure that happened. It's just that when you looked You can only do that for so many times. And top to bottom, they just didn't have the talent to get it done. So now you're getting Michael Pierce back, who didn't play last year, opted out.
An early down addition, right? He's a 2-down run stuffer.
You added Dalvin Tomlinson as a big free agent. You added Sheldon Richardson back after him being with the Browns for a couple of years. You're getting Donnell Hunter back, who the last time we saw him was coming off a career year, looked like finally becoming one of the very, very best pass rushers in the NFL, had 80 total pressures that season, I think. You still had Eric Kendricks, Harrison Smith, and then the secondary. You bring in Patrick Peterson, who, isn't the player he used to be, but I think within this defense will actually look a lot better than he was in Arizona, because the Vikings their sort of calling card in the secondary is they do everything, and you can't tell all the times what they're going to do. So by doing everything, they essentially help out the corners by not asking them to do one thing constantly and therefore telegraphing it for the offense. So Patrick Peterson will do a lot more zone stuff than he was doing in Arizona, and I think have a better time because of it. They bring in Bashad Breeland, who's been okay. Mackenzie Alexander comes back. And then you've got all the young guys that were stuck last year trying to do it by themselves. Cameron Dantzler. Okay, they don't have their first round
Not
pick.
all the young guys.
Right. But there's a lot of reasons to think that defense should be a lot better than it was.
Yeah. Any concern? Peterson's skill set has never really been zone coverage, but at this point in his career,
I think it would be now.
Yeah, he can't man up like he used to. That's why it wasn't great in Arizona last year. And you mentioned Eric Kendricks and Harrison Smith. I mean, they're two of the better players at their respective positions. So yeah, I think that's why I think there's a lot to be positive about with the Vikings. They're attacking the secondary with volume, the veterans that you mentioned, the mix. They'll find the best group, right? In that secondary. Plus the Zimmer factor, he does elevate his defenses overall, as you've highlighted. My question comes down to the offense, and I think it's the Baker and
it's the same problem they've had for years, which is why is their offensive line unable to get back to average? It's always bad.
Now,
still bad.
The steps that they took to get there, we lauded their process during the draft. We liked the fact that they traded down.
Yeah.
In the first round. Still drafted Christian Darrisaw, who, if they took him at 13 or 14, was it 14? If they took him there, we said, hey, good. We'd say, hey, good pick, starting left tackle.
Is that a red flag to you, though? The idea that they were prepared to trade down and not essentially lose him. So, if they had just picked Darrisaw where they were drafting, you would be like, great pick. We love that fit. It's fantastic. It's an offensive lineman. They needed that. Great. The fact that they got him available when it didn't look like he would be available in some play, depending on what you were looking at, then traded down and essentially went, yeah, that's great, but we're going to run the risk of not having him, and then draft him anyway. That is not a ringing endorsement of how they feel about Christian Darrisaw.
It's a perspective, Sam.
Which would
definitely
then
a perspective that you have there.
Which would then be added to the general perception in the NFL, if you want to put that together as like amalgam of the NFL was lower on this guy than we were because we thought he would be off the board at the time they picked. So now you've got the Vikings being low on him to the point where they were willing to risk not getting him, and the NFL, who let him slip as far as the Vikings twice. The league generally doesn't seem to love Darrisaw.
I get what you're saying, and I posed this sometime over the summer that perhaps we should think less about our priors and more about the consensus and all that stuff. I think they were just playing the game, man. I think they were just playing value. I don't think it's smart to say I need to get a left tackle. I think they're just playing the board, and the way they played the board essentially led to getting a Christian Darrisaw, getting a Wyatt Davis in the third round, and getting a Kellen Mond. Right? So a backup developmental quarterback, a potential starting guard in Wyatt Davis, and a starting left tackle in Christian Darrisaw. I just think it's a good process. But yeah, I mean, maybe there's a concern that they were willing to roll the dice. Fine.
Yeah, and things haven't been going great for him so far. It's not like he stepped in and looked.
And he's
like,
legitimately battling Rashad Hill for.
Yeah, it's not like he stepped in and looked like immediately. Okay, whatever the process and whatever that says about him, he is the starting left tackle, and he looks great in camp, and things are going well, and we're all happy. It's still up in the air. So
along the offensive line, let's do what we did before. Who the sure things versus question marks. The thing you can.
There's one sure thing.
Yes, and that Brian O'Neill at right tackle, 78 grade last year, good and solid. Left and right guard has been left guard especially has been just a train wreck, right, in Minnesota. Center has not been good. Garrett Bradbury had a 61 grade, former first-round pick.
Amazing that he's still starting.
And he's supposed to be that perfect scheme fit. I mean, when you're watching center film and you see the incredible reach blocks that Garrett Bradbury executes, it's like, boom, get him in that Shanahan tree and all that stuff and run that outside zone. But there's more to it than that. Pass protection's been a huge issue, and you do more than just reach block.
The only good news for this offensive line is that both the guards, who were amongst the worst players in the NFL at their position last year, are probably not going to be starting this year. So they're replacing Drew Samia and Dakota Dozier, at least so far.
I think Ezra Cleveland will do fine as a rookie at guard, a second-year player at guard.
Maybe, but again, like that, he was not. There's a lot of tackles, college tackles, that automatically get projected into guards because of the way they play the game and the way they're built and how they stack up. Generally big fire hydrant type of guys who don't have the length or athleticism and maybe are a little less finesse in their game. You're like, okay, good left tackle in college though he was, that guy's probably a left guard at the next level. Cleveland was not that kind of player. Like Cleveland was the other end of the spectrum where you're like, oh, we really like his athleticism and his finesse, but maybe he doesn't have the weight and the size to be an NFL left tackle. And that's why, but now, like, that's the last player you want playing guard for you. And
I get it.
Here we are.
They really, and they also mentioned that they really wanted to add size as well. Darisaw was a big reason that they got him. He's a monster, and he does crush people in the run game. I was questioning Darisaw's scheme fit initially because remember you were mock drafting him to the Vikings. I was like, not the cleanest outside zone blocker and all that stuff. So yeah, I get it. The offensive line is the big question mark
again.
Playmaker wise, if Justin Jefferson is healthy and Adam Thielen is healthy, these are ifs now with Jefferson in preseason and Thielen's history. But those two plus Dalvin Cook get some dudes here.
Yes. They're the classic example of a team that's incredibly good in terms of the starters, but what happens if one of those guys gets
fragile?
hurt?
Very fragile.
Not even that necessarily any one of those players is fragile, but the depth is insanely fragile. Like if one of those guys gets hurt, your starter becomes some combination of, D.D. Westbrook, Chad Beebe, Immer Smith, Marset, the rookie. Like it's not good.
Yeah, so I mean that's what it's going to come down to here with the Vikings. They love to run the ball, set up play action. Cousins has played good, solid football. Still don't necessarily trust Cousins as like the guy to carry your team. He's always put up good numbers. I do also think he's always ended up in a good system. He's always ended up in a system with good receivers, not always the best offensive line, but a play action driven system that we talked about the personnel thing. He's going to face heavy boxes, looking to stop Dalvin Cook. He's in favorable passing situations. So is there another step to Cousins' game where he can legitimately, I know he played better in the fourth quarter last year too, even not in garbage time. Can he take over and win some games on his own? I feel like that's the annual question. And outside of one game here and there, you never really see it.
Not enough. I mean, I think ultimately the worse the situation is around Kirk Cousins, the worse he plays. And I mean that in every scenario. So offensive line, receiving talent, game situation, like all of these things, the worse it is in any one of those areas, the worse Cousins is going to play. And the flip side of that is it means, if you have the 2017 Minnesota Vikings, Kirk Cousins can win you a Super Bowl. If you don't have that, and looking at this roster, they don't have that, he can't. Particularly not when there's like a Tampa Bay Buccaneers looming on the horizon, and that's the team you need to get past.
All right, so 8.5. Is that what I said?
I think so.
8.5. We're going over or under for the Vikings here.
Under.
I'm going to go over. If they're healthy, I mean, obviously, but not that you can preface that. I think they have enough offensive firepower. I'm a little curious about the offensive line additions. Maybe not getting great publicity at this point. Maybe don't want to overrate that, but if it is Rashad Hill and some of the, playing left tackle, there's some questions.
I mean, it would fit naturally.
The defense will be better, though.
It would fit perfectly in their track record of offensive linemen, which is, hey, we've drafted this guy to fix this position. Oh, our left tackle of the future is now playing left guard? Okay.
Back-to-back years of doing that. I think the defense will be better, though. I'm going to go over for the Minnesota Vikings.
Okay.
Let's wrap it up. Detroit Lions.
Yes.
We had a coffee mishap this morning. We both went and
You're going Dan Campbell.
So doubled up.
So we got 2 ventis with 2 shots in them each. We got 1,000 milligrams of caffeine.
I'm just going to drink them all in honor of Dan.
And it doesn't matter because you're 6'10" and 280 plus pounds.
Oh, there's so much.
It's a lot of body to absorb caffeine.
I know. There's a lot. I need a lot of caffeine.
By the way, what questions are people asking Dan Campbell? Did you see yesterday he went on some soliloquy about how he used to clean chickens or something as a job?
No, but I feel like I need to start listening to his pressers a little bit more.
I need to start finding out what they're asking him. Is this, hey, your starting left guard, gave up a couple pressures here, and then somehow that segues into chicken skinning? Or are they asking him hey, Dan, what did you do when you were 15?
You just go where the road takes you.
I don't understand the process that's different for Dan Campbell and
then he's talking about chickens and his caffeine
in press conferences
and biting kneecaps
versus other coaches where these aren't coming up.
I mean, given the kneecap biting or whatever, he maybe just volunteers this information.
It's possible, but that's what I'm saying. What is the segue from, hey, Okudah had a rough day out there today to, yeah, look, we've all had rough days. Back when I was 16, I was cleaning the chickens. I hated it. I'm curious.
So given the rebuild in Detroit, what do you want to see? What would happen this season to make you feel like this is the regime to turn things around? We have faith in Dan Campbell and that they're moving in the right direction. They just win. Their over-under is 5, by the way. So obviously expectations are low. I mean, if they just have a good competitive season.
I would like to see a couple of players take steps forward, and I would like to see evidence that there's a scheme at work. So, they might not be good because there's some major lack. There's a major dearth of talent at certain important positions. But if they have a scheme that shows they're not undermining their players left and right that it was in previous years, if Jeffrey Okudah takes a step forward in particular, guys like that, if it's all right, there's some redemption going on here. The system is functioning. Now we just need to add talent in the right areas and we can move forward. I think that offensive line is potentially a very good unit. If the scheme starts to do some of the things we've talked about for other teams, where it's elevating the players and making life easier, and maybe Jared Goff doesn't look like a total disaster even though he doesn't have guys to throw to because the line's okay and the scheme's doing some clever things, that's all they're shooting for, so that they can say, yeah, this was a step in the right direction, and now next offseason we go big on wide receivers and maybe a couple of other spots, and now we're rebuilt.
I think the trench play will be fascinating. It's what we talked about quite a bit around the draft. It's what they did strategically with their first 3 picks: Penei Sewell, Alim McNeil, getting a lot of hype already. The monster nose tackle out of NC State, Levi and Wuzurike out of Washington. So watching John Pennicini too back there as well, big run stuffer out of Utah. If they could tap into that skill set, I think the trenches are intriguing for the Lions. Jared Goff, I'm really fascinated to see what he does outside of the the McVay's wings or covering. What is Jared Goff, right? More Jared Goff. We've only seen Jared Goff with Jeff Fisher for a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a rookie and things were very different back then. And we've seen him with Sean McVay. He's not going to look as bad as he did with Jeff Fisher, right? McVay's not that good with Jared Goff. So I want to see Goff in this new system with some definitely a questionable group of receivers with Brashad Perryman, Tyrell Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown as the top 3.
I'm also kind of curious so it became a problem for Sean McVay that Jared Goff was essentially this paint-by-numbers quarterback, and all he could do was okay, he told me to go out there and go 1 to 2 to 3 and execute this in this exact pattern, and that's what I'm going to do. And it became an issue that he just couldn't do anything by himself, right? He was almost like this automaton or a remote control quarterback that McVay had to function from the sideline, before the headset cuts out at 15 seconds before the play and those kinds of things. So it's if you're McVay, I need something that can function on his own. I need to go get Matthew Stafford, send him out there with the rough idea, and then he can make a masterpiece happen. But I'm curious about whether McVay actually fed that from a Jared Goff point of view.
That was what I was going to say.
If you are this quarterback who sort of skews towards a subservient role within this whole thing, and this guy is telling me what to do right up until 15 seconds before the snap where the headset cuts out, and I have this rigid formula that I have to go through, and like, does he just seize up and become, this is what I do now? I'm just a function of this dude's offense. Freed from that, do you actually see Jared Goff like get a bit more creative and a bit more independent and play better because of it?
So what I was going to say about Goff, if you were describing his skill set coming out of Cal and which system he would have success in, you would never pair him with McVay. Because Goff, he was in the shotgun the whole time. He was running air raid. He was really quick through his progressions, and I think he mastered the air raid really well for whatever that's worth. He also had some back shoulder creativity. Like when you watch a quarterback and it's like, oh, he threw this pass that you don't always make, but he executed it, right? He saw a guy, threw it to a tiny window and got it to him. None of that stuff is really a part of McVay's offense. They don't run a ton of quick game. He's under center, was under center a ton. They put him out on, boot action all the time. Something you're like, Jared Goff? He's like one of the bottom 5 guys you would expect to roll out a lot, in the NFL. So that's what I'm intrigued by. I don't think and he was fine. I think he executed the system fine. Paint by numbers was a good description for how he played in that system. But I'm intrigued by it too. Even with maybe not the best playmakers, as we said, is he in the gun a lot more? Is it more vertically driven? Can he use a little creativity trying to beat man coverage and, with the big receivers and Perryman and Williams throwing back shoulders and the whole deal. So I'll be watching Goff because I think, Goff data points, man, outside of the McVay umbrella. And you mentioned the intriguing players. I'll cite it once again. When you ask your corners to play a ton of man coverage like the Lions did for the most of the last 3 years, you might get some ugly grades in there. Amani Oruwariye, Jeffrey Okudah can be very good players. I still think they can be. And we'll see. And Ifeatu Melifonwu, who they drafted out of Syracuse, big dude who can move. So I think the secondary is intriguing too here for the Lions.
Yeah, I mean, I would be amazed if both those guys and then Melifonwu weren't actually a lot better than what they had last year this season, just from changing the scheme.
And let's just describe the entire roster is in a clear rebuild, but the offensive line, I think we ranked them 7th. I get off the top of my head. Taylor Decker at left tackle is very good. Penei Sewell, the first-round pick at right tackle. Frank Ragnow just signed the highest center deal in history, top 3 center probably in the NFL now as well. Guard is a bit of a question, but intriguing players in Jonah Jackson. Vaitai moves in there where he's been solid. I mean, we might be looking at – it's just going to be an interesting dynamic where they'll have this good line, not great playmakers. Whatever Jared Goff is, they might move the ball better. It might be a big DeAndre Swift year too. If those dudes are run blocking like they can and all of a sudden there's a rushing attack in Detroit, everything that they said Stafford needed for years, but the pass game isn't good. Like that could be the way the Lions look this year just by the roster construction.
I don't think the Lions will be as bad as everybody thinks they will.
Look at us talking us into some positivity here.
The Lions are the second favorite for the number 1 overall pick after Houston, obviously. I don't think they're that bad. Now, okay, we've said before that for a while now there haven't been that many glaringly terrible teams every year.
Right.
So you're sort of the number 2 favorite for the number 1 overall pick is oftentimes actually a team that doesn't look awful, on paper.
Yeah.
And the Lions, I guess, fit that ticket. But it feels like people are underrating where this team is because of how bad they were under the previous regime.
You usually have to have horrendous quarterback play to have that number 1 overall pick. And even last year, like Sam Darnold isn't in that level. The Jets were competing. Gardner Minshew certainly wasn't in that bucket, although with some of the backups in there, it wasn't great. So yeah, usually like Jared Goff could be just good enough that they do win 5 or 6 games. That's the over-under is at 5. I don't know that it's a lock to go under. I'm talking myself into them being competitive, but it's a big unknown. We don't know much about Dan Campbell, Aaron Glenn, defensive coordinator. We don't know much about them. It's first time for these guys.
Yep.
Would you go over or under?
I'm going over.
5.
Over. I think people are sleeping on the Lions to a degree.
Classic Sam has gone over for all NFC North teams. Sans.
No, I know. Yeah,
Vikings.
said the Vikings.
Sans the Vikings. I know. Let me finish. Noted Vikings hater, Sam Monson over here. I'll say under just to even it up. I think I went over for 2 and under for 2 in the NFC North, just to balance it out.
Yeah.
That's how you do it.
I see.
I went over for everybody in the NFC West except the Rams, and I didn't love it. Look at that. We're through 3/4 of the league, and that only took us about 2 hours.
Yeah.
And we went live. We appreciate
smooth.
everybody tuning in live. Any good questions here in the chat that we want to answer?
We don't have time to answer them.
No, we don't.
So
I decided hashtag PFF NFL podcast.
I see.
Hashtag PFF
That's
NFL
very
podcast.
creative.
Send your team-centric questions, and we will take one question per team and answer it next Thursday here on the PFF NFL podcast. That's it.
We might also answer it on the daily because there's nothing happening right now.
We also might answer them on the daily. So the Norths in the Central are in the books. We'll hit up the South next Monday, previewing every team here in the NFL. We got football this weekend, Thursday through Sunday, is it? I don't know. There's games every day. So enjoy the preseason action. We'll be back here on Monday previewing the AFC and NFC South and probably have a little bit of some takeaways from the preseason.
Okay.
See you Monday.